So good morning. Thanks for braving the, was it single digits when everybody got up? Yeah, single digit temperatures today. Was this number 3, 4, 2? No, this is definitely not number 2.
This is the second time we've done it.
All right, we've done it 3 times. This will be the 3rd time that we've done this. And I hope that we can kind of grow it. We had like almost 40 people sign up. We do have people that are out in Western New York that are watching at home. That's kind of why I decided to do a live stream this year. So I'm going to introduce myself, I'm going to introduce the panel, and then I'm going to talk about bent bar powerlifting, USA powerlifting, things like that. And then we're going to get into, I don't know, we haven't really discussed who, you guys want to rock, paper, scissors or something? See who's going to go first? 1, 2, 3. We'll just go down the line. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So my name is Gian Dario. I am the president and owner of Bent Bar Powerlifting. I got into the sport in about 2013. I've always been involved with some kind of strength training, and you'll see by a picture that I'm going to show here at the end of my slideshow presentation. But I didn't really the sport is really underground, and you really need to kind of search for it to find anything out about it. So I found it, got involved with a gentleman who was kind of no longer involved with the organization or powerlifting in general, and worked me into understanding the flow of how to run a meet and things like that. I started my first competition was in 2014 at the New York State Games, New York State Championships, and then it's kind of progressed since then. The last time I competed was 2020. Had probably my best meet ever, so I don't really know if I want to capitalize on that. We're just going to kind of leave it at that. So the reason why I kind of formed the group, there was 5 of us back in the day up in Denton, Clifton Park, that kind of, we all had the same vision. We just wanted to hang out together, lift weights, and go to a meet and compete. The other 4 have unfortunately kind of fallen off, but I have kind of kept the torch lit, and we're moving forward. The team is now 26 strong as opposed to 5, and we hold all facets of roles within bent bar powerlifting, and you're going to see, kind of the breakdown of what that hierarchy kind of is. The vision has always been community first, and then obviously the strength in numbers always helps, and strengthen yourself, making sure that you could always strive for those goals, have attainable goals. Injury, Kevin's going to talk about injury prevention. We want to make sure that our team is safe and they're not out there doing dumb things and potentially, setting themselves up for some kind of failure. But I now work for USA Powerlifting full-time, and that's actually kind of, I spent 34 years in the automotive industry, and it wasn't on my radar at all, but now here I am, so I actually am running the technical side of USA Powerlifting full-time, and it's actually, I'm busier now than I was doing my real job, which is kind of interesting, but, so to take your hobby and turn it into a career now is something that I would, if I look back and saw that 10 years ago, I never would have saw that on my trajectory at all, but here we are. So, to give you a little bit of, if this is gonna work for me, there we go. So, what is it that makes up bent bar powerlifting? You know, what do we bring to the table? We have run over the course of the last, not 10 years, but we started literally running meets in 15. We've run a bunch in USA Powerlifting. We've done a bunch of, we started running unsanctioned meets, so that would basically mean anybody could walk it off the street and just do whatever. And that was really just to kind of, it was a litmus test for us to see what the culture would have brought, who would be involved. And we were amazed that we had a lot of people that showed up for those meets, you know. And we did it for about 3 years, and then I decided, you know what? Let's level up and actually move on to USA Powerlifting events. So as you can see, we've run a bunch since 2015, and last year was the most we've ever run. We ran 10, and we ran our first meet in Florida. We run them all basically in New York. That was the first time we ran a meet in Florida. So we're branching out. I'm actually helping Canada come online for USA Powerlifting as well. They're going to be coming online in, is that April? April. So that'll be our newest affiliate to USA Powerlifting. So if you want to go lift in Toronto, I would say sign up for that meet. It's only literally like 45 minutes from Niagara Falls, and it's really, really close. We also do a bunch of special meets. So we do a lot of things with the Special Olympics. We run the Spartan Showdown. I got involved with the Special Olympics of New York, so we helped them run the powerlifting segment of their New York State Games. So I've done that for the last 3 years. This is the last year it'll be in Ithaca, and then it's going to move to another college or university somewhere in the state. We don't know where it's going to be yet, but we've grown it from being a one-platform meet to a two-platform meet for all the Special Olympians in and across the entire New York State, and it's very, very cool. That's a big number. For just a small, part of the community, we brought in over 2,000 lifters that have competed on our platforms in, less than 8 years, and I think that's huge. So let's move on to kind of what we are and who we are and what we do. Right now, we have, we got 4 meet directors. Right now, we got me, actually kind of in a line. Well, no, they're not. Me, Sean, Jordan, who am I missing?
From that bar?
Yeah.
Matt Santiago.
Oh, Matt Santiago, who is not here. He owns a gym in Kingston. If you're ever down in Kingston, Sport of Iron, look it up. Great gym. Would highly recommend it. We also have, I can't read that. I got to get up. Sorry. I know, right? So let me back up. 26 members, 4 meet directors. Oh, yeah, I'm standing in front of my own camera. We have 11 referees. Everybody that's on the panel that's a referee, raise your hand. Just sitting up there's 3 of them, including me. So 1 national, 1 regional, and 9 state. I encourage all of my people to be a referee because that's the best way to get back. If you don't want to compete anymore or you want to really see the action from the other side of the fence, that's the best way to do it right there. We have a national level MC. This guy, I brought him to the Arnold with me last year. Actually, no. Was it 2 years ago, 22 or 23?
Last year, but national was 2 years ago.
Okay, so yeah, I brought him down to one of our national events. They loved him. He and Gino, if everybody here probably knows Gino, right? So him and Gino work off each other great. And now he's kind of on the national MC crew. So he'll be going with me to the Arnold in March and then to Collegiate and Raw and wherever else we go. We have an in-house photographer, this guy. So it's one of the things I like keeping everything kind of in-house, and that means that, I don't have to go outside and look for people, and Kevin does a great job. His rates are ridiculous. Compared to what I've seen, they're really good. and the quality of his work.
Ridiculously inexpensive.
Inexpensive, yes, sorry. That's
This came off a little weird.
right. He's very reasonable. How's that?
Terrible.
Sorry, I haven't had any caffeine yet. And we also have, I haven't, it's sitting over there. We also have some coaching staff. So our coaching staff, these two guys, we also have a couple of others that kind of dabble in it. They're not, they're finding their way, but they're getting there. And we have a registered dietitian as well. So, and a doctor of physical therapy, kind of why they're on the panel, right? So the other part of it is kind of like the most important thing. The rest of the people that make up the other 26 members, they're volunteers. They actually help on the platform, whether it be setting up, breaking down, spotting, and loading. And I think the guys and gals that we have on Bent Bar do an amazing job. They'll bust their ass, and they'll do whatever it takes to actually get the job done. So I commend all of them. A couple of them sitting over there. Raise your hand. And in the back, maybe. So they're the ones that actually, those are the people that touch the weight, where we just sit in and kind of judge you. They're doing the work. We're really not. So work in powerlifting, where can it take you? It can take you from this. That's me. I could clean 40 pounds. That bar was hollow, by the way. To looking like that, happy Mr. McSquat face. So that's kind of like my presentation, but it's I just want you guys to understand that, I put together this crew. There's reasons behind it, and I want people to understand that I'm just not nitpicking people out of the blue to kind of do whatever. So everybody up here serves a purpose, no matter if it's over there switching buttons on the switcher or whatever. They all have a purpose. So that's it. That's me. Look like that guy. Thank you. Who's up next?
Just doing introductions.
Oh, yeah, let's introduce people. So right here we have Sean Collins. He owns Sincere Training Systems. Stand up.
There you go.
It's early, so, I know it's early for you. We have Jordan Crandall. He also is a coach for Sincere Training Systems. We have Mike Perkins, Iron Mike Perkins. He is our registered dietitian. And we have Kevin Drury. He is our DPT. So he's going to talk about injury prevention, food, lifting, coaching, all that good stuff. So there's your panel. And I'm done talking. You want to do your thing up?
Yeah, could you? Yeah, sure.
What's going on, everybody? Is this gonna work?
It's the microphone.
I was just like a microphone for the actual. Okay, cool. What's going on, everybody? My name is Sean Collins. Over here is my assistant coach, Jordan Crandall. I've been running Sincere Powerlifting for about 3 years since I moved up to Albany. Prior to, I was owning a powerlifting gym in Brooklyn, New York called Murder Crow's Barbell Club. And I moved up here with my wife, and now I have a 9-month-old daughter and 2 dogs and 1 cat. So life has been great up here, and really, really appreciate Bent Bar for holding this down. And also, I train here full-time at ABC Sports and Fitness. You'll see me here typically at early in the morning, around 7 a.m. or so. Come up and talk to me. I may seem relatively unfriendly, but I'm introverted, so generally I just wait for people to come up and talk to me. So today we're going to be going over some basics on squat, bench, and deadlift. There are a million different cues that come down to doing the 3 different movements. However, we're going to make it focused on, if you're starting off with the sport, here are the things that you absolutely must know, and here are some things that we as coaches look for in the squat and bench and deadlift when we're reviewing them either in person or online. Oh, it's a picture of me. So with squat, the main things that we're looking for in terms of competition is that if you're doing a competition and it's all 3 movements, you're always going to start off with the squat. We're looking to make sure that first and foremost, the squat itself is within the parameters of competition. So when you're competing, you're going to get 2 different commands from a referee. The first command is going to be a squat command, and the second command is going to be a rack command. So First and foremost, when you unrack the bar to your own volition, you are going to keep your knees locked out. You're going to be standing up very tall like Jordan is right here. Once the referee gives you the squat command, you come down and squat to your own volition, come down to below parallel. Everyone hear that crack in his knees? Hopefully it's his knees, but in this case, yeah. So essentially you come down below parallel. You do not have to pause at the bottom. You do not have to get a command to come up. That would just make the movement significantly harder. So as soon as you squat to below parallel and stand back up, you wait for a couple seconds. The referee will tell you to rack, and then you should get 3 white lights. So in terms of competition standards, we're really looking to make sure that the squat is below parallel. And so that essentially means that your hip crease is below the top of your knee joint, like so. You stand back on up with everything fully locked out at the knees and at the hips. And once you get the rack command and you listen, then generally you would get 3 white lights. Should I go into reasons why you wouldn't get a white light? Yeah. Okay. So reasons why you wouldn't get a white light. A white light means a successful lift. You need 2 out of the 3 white lights to do that. Reasons for a red light. Number 1, it's not hitting depth, right? That's the most popular reason. So Jordan's going to come down to above parallel. And so if someone squats to that range of motion, they unfortunately would get a no lift. The second reason is up and down motion. So as Jordan squats to below parallel, he stops, comes back down, and comes back up. That also is grounds for a red light, or all 3 red lights. Another reason would be just simply failing the lift. And so one thing to note is, yeah, don't show that one. But if you fail the lift, just keep in mind that at all USA powerlifting competitions, there's going to be at least 3 spotters that are going to be helping you with the weight in the event that you fail. The quickest way to start off your first competition on the bad note, and also to get a bad rap with the community, is to dump the bar on the people trying to help you out. So the main thing that you got to do here is that in the event that you're failing, just shake your head or just come back down, and the spotters will help you out. Do not dump the bar. So in that regard, in terms of equipment, the main things that people utilize when it comes to the squat, as I'm wearing right over here, you'll see knee sleeves, you'll see a belt, and you'll see a singlet, which I'm wearing, and then you'll see wrist wraps. You don't actually need any of these pieces of equipment to compete in your first competition. They only simply help you lift the weight a little bit better. So knee sleeves are helpful with respect to keeping your knees warm. So if your knees hurt a little bit or tend to get sore during squats, knee sleeves are very helpful, and they also give a big performance benefit to lifting the most amount of weight possible. I personally recommend the Inzer knee sleeves. That's the ones that I'm personally wearing right in this picture. But SPD, Inzer, A7, Stoic, they all make really good equipment. Wrist wraps, completely optional if you have like wrist pain or any kind of like wrist immobility. Wrist wraps are super helpful. Belt, would highly recommend a belt for anyone that's interested in competing, because it does help you push into your abs a little bit harder, makes you brace a little bit better, and probably has the single biggest benefit to you actually lifting the weight itself. In addition to that, if you're interested in doing your first competition, you do need a singlet. So in all local competitions, the rules for a singlet are very, very lax. They essentially just have to be a one-piece material, unsupportive, and personally, it's more so a matter of how they look on you. SPD singlets tend to be the best looking, in my opinion, in addition to Virus. But I do hear that the Titan singlet, which I personally compete in every once in a while as well, especially if I didn't have a good meat prep and I need all the help I possibly could ever get, the Titan is the best one for me to go with.
And if, in addition to that, with the equipment that Sean all just mentioned, there are 2 different types of categories that a lifter can fall under, and it's raw or equipped. The knee sleeves, the wrist wraps, the belt, those are all included in raw powerlifting, as they're not supportive gear. On the opposite end, if you have knee wraps, which wrap multiple times around the leg, or a supportive suit that helps, basically with you getting out of the hole of the squat, or pressing off your chest on bench, or getting out of the bottom position on deadlift, those would all be considered equipped lifting.
And so when it comes to movement cueing, so like we said, we're going to be going over the main general points of how to execute a decent to great squat. So in this case, we have a couple of cues on the slide. The first one we're going to actually start off with is breaking at the hips and knees at the same time. A lot of times that ends up, if you don't break at the hips and knees at the same time, so for example's sake, if I squat with my hips breaking first, like so, or if I squat with my knees breaking first, like so, you're going to have a hard time with finding depth, but from a performance standpoint, you're going to have a hard time spreading the load across as many different musculatures as you possibly can. So what we typically recommend is making sure that you are bending at the hips and knees at the same time, like so, right? That also helps with the second point of finding midfoot. So when we are trying to find midfoot, the main thing that me and a lot of different other coaches are looking for is ensuring that the barbell is over your center of mass. So in the squat, the center of mass is going to be over your midfoot. In the bench press, your center of mass is going to be over your shoulders. And on your deadlift, your center of mass is going to be with your armpits over the barbell. These are, if you can encapsulate these three things and master these three things across each discipline, then your squat would be likely the most efficient it possibly can be outside of small tweaks that you may want to make or small experiments that you want to have. Jordan, if you wouldn't mind demonstrating a midfoot squat for me. So it's harder done than said, but in this regard, as Jordan's starting point is generally going to be somewhat behind the midfoot. So the midfoot is defined as like the shoelace knot right over here. So as we bend at the hips and knees at the same time, come down as below parallel as you can, we're going to find that the bar is more so over the shoulders, more so over the shoelace knots itself, and stand back on up. What we're really looking for here, and you can relax, Jordan, thank you very much. What we're looking for here is if the bar is over the midfoot, you're using an equal amount of your quads, adductors, hamstrings, and glutes, and also to a degree your upper back. The biggest thing to note here is that if you're bending your hips and knees at the same time and you have even foot pressure, meaning that you're trying to push into your heel, big toe, and ball of foot at the same exact time, you should find yourself over the midfoot more often than not. That's why we typically recommend, and all athletes of sincere powerlifting usually film from the side view as opposed to the front, like more Instagram-friendly view that you see a lot of times, primarily to see and assess bar path and also any deviations from bar paths at the bottom to the ascent. So big thing that we're looking for here is staying over midfoot in the event that you're pitching forward or anything of that nature. It could be to a couple of different things. That's one of the biggest faults when it comes to powerlifting. When someone fails their squat, their upper back is going to dump forward and their hips are going to rise up. Part of that could be a muscular deficiency. Maybe quads need to be a little bit stronger. Maybe everything needs to be a little bit stronger. But a lot of times it's usually due to the bar going more so towards the heels as opposed to the midfoot itself. Any questions about that so far? We're good? All right. So in terms of finding what works best for you in terms of stance, bar position, etc., powerlifting is very individualized. So all the programs that we write, all the cues that we give to individuals, it's not like a one size meets all. The only cue that we really know that generally meets everyone is finding the midfoot and bending at the hips and knees at the same time, unless there's some sort of injury that you're working through or some sort of bias that you're working through. But in terms of what works best for you, there's a couple of different things that I'd like to offer, and the first one being your stance. So generally speaking, I'm going to move to the middle so that way most, if not all, can see me. So in terms of stance, I have some lifters that squat this narrow, like so, and I have some lifters that squat this wide, like so. A lot of that comes down to individual anthropometry, and anthropometry is a fancy way of saying that's just how you personally are built. Some lifters are going to have a longer torso, some lifters are going to have longer legs and a short torso, some lifters are going to have short arms or longer arms, right? It all depends on how you were born, essentially, and how you are made up physically will dictate what your best position is for you personally. So if you tend to have higher levels of hip mobility, then generally speaking, you could probably afford to go a little bit wider. If you feel like you have a hard time hitting depth and you feel like your stance is on point, try to think about where your foot angle is. So a lot of times people can benefit greatly from a standard position, going right outside of shoulder width with their toes pointed out about 30 degrees. right? That's generally going to be where 80% of all powerlifters are going to kind of naturally organize. But if you feel like there's something missing in your squat, or if you feel like it could be better, going either a little bit narrower or a little bit wider or playing around with toe angle can be very helpful. Also keep in mind that foot pressure is also very, very important as well. If you only push into your heels, you have a higher chance of using your hips. If you only push into the ball of your foot, you have a higher chance of falling forward, right? So trying to have a even distribution in foot pressure is also very helpful. And speaking of the foot pressure, having good footwear also helps out a ton as well. You can get by with squatting in flats. You can get by with squatting in heeled shoes. They make special squat shoes that have a like 1-inch elevation in the back of the heel. And if you feel like your ankle is like the primary sore spot in terms of your mobility, a heeled shoe is a really, really great idea. And this is my heel shoe right here. So I personally like to squat in the Reebok Legacies. I don't have any financial stake in any of these companies that I've personally recommended. But I just like ish. So in this case, yeah, squat shoes or flats are a good idea. I've seen people like squat houses in Jordans or in Converses or whatever the case is. So whatever works best for you is what is best. And so in terms of bar position, Jordan's going to display a high bar position and a low bar position from the back. And so this is a high bar position. A high bar position is generally going to be good for competitors that have longer torsos with shorter legs. That way it allows for you to stay over the midfoot. You are going to be a little bit more quad biased. You are going to be a little bit more upright in your squat. This is going to bias you towards your quads and less towards your hips. This is why about 80% or higher of our lifters, and I would garner to say that most power lifters in general, are going to squat either a low bar or a mid bar. So Jordan, go to a low bar for me. So a low bar is best defined as right above your scapula or your shoulder blades, right? So you want to make sure that the bar is above it and not on top of it. You don't want to squat like the French. And so in this case, and the reason why I say the French is because the French national team, very, very talented, but they hold the bar very, very low on their back. Dangerously low. Arguably illegally low. So in this case, a mid bar is also a very good option for people who don't like low bar, but also don't like high bar. I personally squat mid bar, and that's going to be somewhere in between your low bar and your high bar. It's a little bit more subjective in terms of where you're going to place the bar, but if you feel like you can use a little bit more uprightness in your squat, especially to find midfoot in your squat, that's a good idea. So that's the squat. So with respect to bench press, this is going to be the second movement of your competition. So this is, again, assuming that you are doing a full powerlifting competition. That means you go through squat, bench, and deadlift. You can always sign up for a pull only, meaning that you only deadlift, or you can sign up for a push-pull, which means you only do bench and you deadlift. But assuming that you're doing a full powerlifting competition, thank you, Jordan. Assuming you're doing a full powerlifting competition, this is going to be your second discipline of the day. So in this regard, there are 3 commands. There's start, press, and rack. From a success standpoint, bench is a little bit lower in success rate in competition, primarily because there's more commands to have to worry about. So the first command is a start command. You would get awarded the start command once your butt is on the bench, your heels are flat on the ground, and that your elbows are locked out. So essentially, at the bottom of Jordan's, or top of Jordan's position, hips are down on the bench, feet are flat on the ground, elbows are nice and locked out, so you would get the start command. Once he gets the start command, he's going to wait there until I give him the press command, so press, and then once he's locked out, he's going to get the rack command, which is going to rack it in the rack that's not here. So in this regard, the main reasons why someone might not get white lights on their bench press is if their butt comes off the floor or off the bench itself. So if you're filming yourself from the side, if your butt comes off the bench, off the chest or anything of that nature, at any point in the lift after you get awarded the start command, it's going to be a red light. Also, if your heels come up, or your feet can slide, but your heels must stay on the floor. So your feet can slide, that's perfectly legal, although probably scary and uncomfortable for you. But in this case, your heels must stay on the ground the whole time. In the USAPL specifically, your head can actually come up off the bench. So you don't have to have your head positioned on the bench itself. That is a new rule that happened last year. So reasons why someone might get a couple more red lights or unsuccessful lifts or lifts taken away from them perceivably is up and down motion, just like in the squat. So off the chest, if you are seeing up and down motion on the bar path, that is an illegal maneuver. Another reason being is that, so we talked about heels, we talked about butt, and also just simply not having the strength for it. So if you fail at the bottom, remember that there's going to be spotters on each side of your body. So if you fail, you're going to just rest there for a second, think about your decision making, and then people are going to help you out. Huh? Oh, heaving, yes. So if you sink the bar too low onto your chest and then you drop down and then use that momentum to get the bar off your chest, that's also an illegal maneuver. Now, of course, there is no rule about how hard or soft you should touch on the chest itself, but there is a there is subjectivity to how fast you're going to get the press command. So when you bring the bar down to your chest, the reason why a lot of my athletes hate me for doing like 2 count or 3 count pauses is primarily to get used to a long and qualitatively good pause command or pause position. So if you're paused at the bottom of your bench and you are like, waving around, or you're not super, solid on the bottom of your position, meaning that it's still in motion and it's not motionless, the referee can hold you there for as long as they want until the bar stops, right? So just keep that in mind. That's the reason why typically we advocate for a softer touch, meaning that when you come down to that bottom position, you're looking to pump the brakes right before you make contact so you have the most motionless touch point possible to also elicit the fastest press command possible. If you are held there for a very long time, no matter how hard you've been training, it's going to make your rep significantly harder. So when you're training, make sure that you're pausing for longer than anything you need to. Get press commands from the people here. If you see us at the gym, we're always happy to help out, or from your friend, but just make sure your friend doesn't give you a very fast press command, because that's what I personally hate. So in that regard, in terms of like movement cueing, or actually let's go into equipment. So with this, typically you won't really need a belt. Some people like using belts on bench press. I can only think of like 1 or 2 athletes that I coach that have a belt while they bench press. And the one thing that generally will be pretty standard is having wrist wraps, because that's probably what helps you out the most when it comes to wrist wrap utilization on the bench press. So that way you can like cock back your wrists if you want to. Wrists will be nice and supported, and you won't have like wrist pain after benching. And also, one thing I would highly recommend is benching in flat-soled shoes. So the lower the better, the grippier the better. 100% of the time when you're doing a USAPL competition, there's going to be a carpet, and the carpet is supposed to be non-stick. This is not a shot at you, Jan, but the carpet's supposed to be non-stick, but they do use the carpet over and over and over again, and then eventually becomes slippery. And so in that regard, would highly recommend to use a rubber-soled, flat-soled shoe, so that way you can feel your feet pushing forward and down. Generally speaking, when it comes to leg drive, meaning that you're trying to push your upper back into the bench as hard as you can by way of your feet, the biggest thing that we want to talk about with leg drive is that you want to pretend like you're sitting down in an office chair that has wheels, and you're trying to push yourself back as hard as you possibly can. That motion of how you're envisioning it in your head is how you should feel on leg drive. So just keep that in mind. Leg drive also helps support the amount of arching that you bring to the table on bench press, and the higher that you can arch, the shorter the range of motion, aka the easier the movement's going to be for you. There is no legal limit to how little or high you can arch. The higher you can arch, the better, to a point. So when it comes to cueing the movements, and what we look for personally as coaches is, number one, good touch point. So we're looking for the bar to make contact right around the sternum area. Like when I'm coaching females, typically what I'd recommend is, if you pretend like you're wearing a sports bra, right, you're trying your best to make contact right at the very last band, that like ½ inch band that you see right over here. Generally speaking, if we're seeing it from the side view, we're looking for the elbow, wrist, and barbell to be stacked on top of each other like so. You don't want to go too far forward. You don't want to go too far up. If you go too far up, your bar path will be affected. And bar path is pushing back towards your shoulders. That's going to make things a lot easier for you on bench press. The one thing that I like to tell my athletes is that there is a force field that exists right above your chest, and it ends right at the collarbone position. So if you can get around that force field, as opposed to pushing through that force field, you're going to have a much more efficient time on your bench press. Another thing that I advocate for is trying your best to keep your elbows as far away from your rib cage as you possibly can. If you find yourself tucking too much, chances are you might be a little bit too wide in your grip, or chances are you might not be putting a lot of pressure on the outside of your palm. So in addition to that, we want to make sure that the hips are not popping off the bottom position. So Jordan, if you wouldn't mind, if you could lay down and show me crappy leg drive. So that means that at some point in the lift, the leg drive has turned off, or we're not thinking about it. So when the lifter comes down to the bottom of their position, if we're seeing the hips pop when Jordan presses, that right over there is probably the most annoying thing you could see on bench press, because that means that we're not as tight as we possibly can be. So if you show me good leg drive, Jordan, yep, so notice that when Jordan did his leg drive, he was able to push his body up onto the back of his upper back. And we see that the hips are fully tight and not moving whatsoever. So you're really trying to get to the aesthetic that your hips don't move at all off the chest. Thank you, Jordan. Now, in terms of things to consider, bar grip is one big thing. I would say the majority of lifters tend to do max grip, and max grip is going to be pointer finger on the ring. Pointer finger on the ring. So that's pretty damn wide, but just keep in mind that there are plenty of lifters that bench 400 pounds and above with a more narrow grip. But generally speaking, most people are going to organize themselves to a wider grip position. But as long as you are either here when you're gripping the bar or somewhere inside that range, then you're going to have a legal time. In addition to that, we want to make sure that your thumb is wrapped around the bar. Please don't try anything like suicide grip or anything of that nature where your thumb goes over the barbell. Your thumb has to wrap around the bar, but wrists can be cocked back or stacked, whichever one works best for you personally. So in that regard, when it comes to grip, I would say try the widest that you can feel like you can handle healthily, and then work yourself in. And then from a width perspective, foot position perspective, generally speaking, the standard starting point that most lifters are going to at least start off with is having their toes pointed out with their heels and knees directly parallel to each other. So you don't want your feet to be super far out. I find that when lifters, this is a very in vogue maneuver in powerlifting, where they have their heels really far out from their starting point. And that might feel good on like a rubbery floor or a very sticky carpet, but it actually has a significant liability when you're working with a carpet that will cause you to slide really quickly. So that's why typically we recommend having your heels a little bit closer to your hips, toes pointed out, foot pressure is going to be in the ball of foot pointing forward and down. So in that regard, before we move on to before we move on to deadlift, I just wanted to also mention frequency in terms of how much should you actually be training the squat and bench on a weekly basis. Squat, most athletes are going to be squatting 2 to 3 times a week. It all really depends on your recovery. If you find that your most intense day is not working out very well, you're probably doing too much. But if you feel like your sets are moving very well, but then when you get to your top set, you feel like you don't have enough of that power to get you through, you may also want to consider that you might be doing too little. So pay attention to how you're recovering every 24 to 48 hours. Are you able to clear soreness? Are you able to outperform your previous week? Are you, how long have you been pushing for? Because typically lifters will need a deload anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks at a time. If you're a brand new lifter, a deload is probably not going to be in your future for a while. And for bench press, so the average amount of lifters or average amount of frequency is anywhere between 3 to 6 times a week. This all depends on your gender, also depends on your training age and things of that nature. So typically females will train bench press anywhere between 4 to 7 times a week, and men will train it anywhere between 2 to 4 times per week on average. So moving on to deadlift. All right, so moving on to deadlift. So this is the third and last movement in the competition. Before going into the deadlift, you want to make sure that you're loading up on some quick carbs. Quick carbs are like things like juices and Gatorades, and Mike will get into that in a little bit. He knows a lot more than I do about that type of stuff. But in general, you want to make sure that you're hydrated, meaning that you're peeing clear, you have some sodium in you, and that you have some carbs in you before you go into your deadlift, because it is a long day. Most competitions are going to last anywhere between 4 to 6 hours in the USAPL on average. So in this case, there's only one command, and that is down. So whether you lift it in sumo or conventional, once you stand it up and your hips and knees are locked out and your shoulders are back, the referee will just say down. So if you want to look like you know what you're doing at your first competition, don't get to the bottom of your deadlift and look at the ref. All right? So just stand up whenever you're ready, okay? So in that case, there's competition standards, meaning that whether you're pulling sumo or conventional. So conventional is generally going to be a narrow stance deadlift. So conventional is going to be underneath your hips. So when you're squatting, you want to be outside of your hips. When you're doing deadlifts, you want to generally be under your hips. If you want to pull sumo, and this is generally going to be, can your sumo outpace your conventional? And then if that's the case, then you probably should pull sumo. If you want to pull sumo, it's going to be, generally speaking, about shins to the ring of the bar, depending on how you're built. So you want to make sure that you are wider in your stance. Toes are going to be pointed out about 30 to 40 degrees or so. And one of the biggest things to keep in mind when it comes to the deadlift is that regardless if you're doing sumo or conventional, it is still a hip-dominant movement and not a quad-dominant movement. I'm stealing this from my coach, and he says we like to squat our deadlifts and we like to deadlift our squats, meaning that on the squat, we want to push our butt back early, but on the deadlift, we want to get too upright and put too much emphasis on the quads. Generally, the biggest thing that we see when it comes to movement fault in the deadlift, or at least inefficiency in the deadlift, is pitching forward, all right? So if Jordan, if you can show this from the side view for everybody. So essentially, and we're going to do conventional for now, or actually you do sumo, whatever, I don't mind. But when Jordan gets to the bottom of his position, the main thing we're really looking for is, can you keep your armpits parallel to the center of the barbell? If you, generally speaking, most people are going to drop your hips down. Most people are going to set up this low. And then the first thing that's going to happen is that they're going to pitch forward off the floor, and they're going to round their back, and they're going to have a really hard time, not just breaking the bar off the floor, but also locking your hips out. If your spine is severely rounded, a little bit of rounding is totally fine, but if your spine is very rounded, your hips can't function as an extension point. So you're going to have to wait until your upper back uncurls before your butt can actually do any help in that regard. So the main thing you are really looking for when you're assessing your own deadlift videos is, am I breaking the bar off the floor with good speed, and am I staying in my starting position consistently? All right. So in that regard, with respect to sumo versus conventional, it's all really going to go based off of how you personally are built. So I'm actually really bad at sumo. My best conventional pull is like 580, and my best sumo pull is like 430 or something like that. So you will see a very big data difference between your sumo and conventional, and you want to more so skate towards the one that is outpacing the other. That's the easiest way to figure it out. Also, one will likely feel significantly better than the other as well. So if you pull sumo and it feels awesome, and it feels like you can just keep loading the weights up, and you feel like conventional is just like calculus, then go towards what you personally feel is best for you. Also, in terms of toe angle, you can play around with toe angle on both sumo and conventional. On conventional, you can turn your toes out. That puts a little bit more emphasis on your glutes. But generally speaking, your toes are going to be forward. With sumo, generally speaking, your toes are going to be pointed out in some sort of fashion, right? But the more you turn out, the more that balance becomes an issue. So if you turn your toes out to a super, super high degree, you could stand to potentially bobble at lockout, and that will make things a lot harder for you to get a good lift. So in that regard, the only other thing to keep in mind here is pulling the slack out of the barbell. So here, it's okay if you have a little bit more of a bias towards heel pressure, because how you push into your feet is going to dictate what muscles are going to be biased. So if you push into your heels, you're biasing into your hips and posterior chain, which is everything behind you. If you're pushing into the ball of your foot, you're more so going to be asking more of your quads. As Jordan is coming down to that bottom position, the first thing he wants to do is try to find that click. So if everyone can hear that click right before he actually pulls, that's the bar pulling up against the plates. And so there's two different ways you can do this. The first way is just simply grabbing the bar and pulling your chest up. That's the basic way to take the slack out of the barbell, because it's going to apply pressure into the bar before you drop down. The best way to do it, which is actually the hardest way to master, is pushing the slack out. So as Jordan gets to the bottom of his position, instead of pulling his chest up, he's going to push through the floor. And notice that in that case, as he's dropping down and holding on to that pressure, the bar pops off the ground without him even really trying. This is a more advanced cue, but I wanted to give you guys a difference of basic versus advanced, because once you feel like you've mastered the movement at your level, there's probably going to be something else to master down the line. So there's always going to be new cues and ways that we can get more pounds on the barbell, but it all really depends on experience, how you can move your body through space, and how aware you are of your own musculature in your body. But especially for most of us are beginners and have either done their first competition or looking to do their first competition, remember to start off with mastering the basics, know the rules before you can break them, hire a coach, and they'll help you break the rules. What's up? Oh, here you go, sir.
If you want it. Hey guys, so I am one of Sean's assistant coaches, Jordan Crandall. I've been lifting at ABC since 2016, been doing powerlifting since about 2015. Started working with Sean, I think it was 2018. I found that I got into a position where I was no longer making progress on my own, or from rerunning programs that I found online or via friends. And I think that that's the most appropriate time, in my opinion, when you should seek, kind of professional help or professional guidance in, making any kind of progress, right? The biggest thing, and very quick talking points here. When looking for a coach, you want to make sure that you're looking for a few things, right? You want affordability, you want good communication, and pretty much good reputability and good knowledge as well. Right, I only spoke to, when I was looking for coaches, I only had interviews with two. Sean, as much as I hate to admit it, was my second call. The first person that I had reached out to, we spoke at length about what we wanted to do, and then, there wasn't really a lot of communication with follow-up. So I reached out to Sean, and Sean, being the professional that he was, asked, out of respect for the other coach, was there anything that went wrong on that end before we start working together, as reputation is important in the powerlifting community, and you don't want to look like you're taking somebody from somebody else because of a poor reason, right? Like I said, there are a ton of free resources online in terms of just starting from the ground up. Like when you first get into the gym, I think when I first started doing powerlifting, and I'm sure a lot of people can agree that have been doing it for a long time up here. Starting Strength is a really good program. Wendler's 531. It's very low frequency, where you're pretty much only squatting, benching, and deadlifting once a week, but it gives you a really good idea of the basics of powerlifting. Like Sean said, as you become a more intermediate or advanced lifter, you generally need a lot more frequency to respond better to training, be it 2 to 3 times a week for squat, 4 to 6 times a week for bench. I would say 1 to 2 times a week for deadlift. 3 might be a little bit excessive sometimes, but it also depends on the gender. It depends on your height, your weight, your training age, so on and so forth. So some of the free resources that you can find online: PRS Performance. His name's Steve DeNovi. He's a coach out of the Midwest. He has a bunch of, I think, as low as 8-week free programs, as high as 22-week free programs. I didn't know Marcellus does free stuff?
No.
No?
I don't think so.
Okay.
He might have.
Oh, you might have at the time?
At some point.
Yeah. Some of these references might be a little bit outdated because we did this last year as well. So the Swole Fesser, starting strength, reactive training systems, some free they're free resources. So they have a lot of content on YouTube, as well as one of the most informative, like groundbreaking content platforms right now is Powerlifting Now. It is a combination of 4 coaches as well as a ton of guest appearances from other coaches that are big in the powerlifting community. They do podcasts, they do technique breakdown, they do programming breakdown. Literally anything you could think of in terms of powerlifting, it's probably covered on there. I believe it's $12 a month to subscribe to it or something like that. Worth every penny. Another coaching consideration is in-person versus remote, right? I know a lot of people, when they first get into the gym, if they're brand new, you probably don't know how to lift that well and you look like a deer in headlights. The important thing to note is that when you're in a public gym or you're in a big community, right, don't be afraid of looking how you lift, right? We all literally started from the same spot. We all probably looked not as well rehearsed as we do now, being more advanced, but a lot of people are in fear of judgment from others, and I know it's easier said than done to push past that, but when you do push past that, it's a lot less stress-bearing. Working with like Sean and myself are both full-time remote coaches, but we have the ability to work in person, given that, I think we both approximately live about 15 to 20 minutes away from ABC. And we also give our athletes the opportunity to schedule in-person meetings. If it's a service the coach offers, great. If not, then if you're the type of individual that wants an in-person coach, then that might not be a great fit for you. Am I missing anything here?
I can say a couple more
Yeah,
words
yeah,
about coaching. So I've been a powerlifting coach for about 9 years now and fully remote for about 3 years. Generally speaking, like in most local gyms, I mean, even at ABC, I think there's 4 or 5 coaching systems or what have you here. So it really very much depends on demographic of the athletes that lifters coach. So for example, if you're looking to make it to a national level, or if you're looking to go past a national level, you want to work with a coach that has that experience, and not necessarily with a coach that's just doesn't have that many national qualified or national aspirations to their demographic. So the biggest thing you want to find out, besides communication and whether it's in person or remote, generally speaking, the best coaches you're going to find are likely going to be remote and not necessarily in person, just because they have the group of numbers and the experience level needed, and also the success rate of going to nationals or winning past nationals. But also, if you hire a remote coach, especially if you go to nationals or regionals or something of that nature, they likely will be there in your corner to handle you as well. Jordan and I at Sincere, we have a policy where if it's 3 hours or less from a driving perspective, we will go and handle an athlete, even if we've never met them in real life before, because it's a celebration of the end of the cycle. But generally, a couple of other things to consider. Number one, how do their athletes enjoy their coaching? So it's totally within reason to reach out to one of the athletes that coach coaches and see how they like that experience, because experience and relationship is really most important. Number two, demographic. Do the athletes that the coach works with, do they look like you? Do they think like you? Because if not, then chances are you might not be a great fit for the team, or at least you might be trying to fit a square into a round hole or something of that nature. Lastly, red flags for coaches. If they don't offer their free time to talk to you at the very least, or to talk about how the fit is and things of that nature, that is a huge red flag. Also, if a coach is overextended. So for example, there's a couple of coaches in the nation that are pushing anywhere between 60 to 100 lifters. I personally have about 85 that I personally coach. And as a team for Sincere, we coach over 150 lifters. But Some coaches, when they're reaching that like 80 to 90 marker, they might actually start to see their system fail a little bit. So always asking like how many lifters do they work with, can they comfortably handle that amount of lifters that they're working with, what their response times are looking like, things of that nature.
Yeah, and I would just say to add to that with red flags, just making sure that, you know, when you do work with somebody, if they have, I don't want to use the term inability, but if they're not able to explain their logic or their reasoning behind why you're doing something or why you're not doing something, or you know, if your training never really changes, you know, not that training needs to change often, but if the scheme of things doesn't change, you know, like as you taper into a meet, you know, you go from, you know, hypertrophy training to more strength training to tapering and peaking. You know, these are all things that coaches need to consider and, you know, really kind of adjust to the individual when you work with people who are different body types, different ages, different genders. Like, not everybody needs to or should have the same training, maybe the same aspects of training, but, you know, not everything works for the same exact person. And I think that's a large key point that a lot of people may miss out on when they're first looking for a coach. And then the last point here, you know, in interview and an onboarding process, Sean and I have the same kind of process where if, you know, somebody wants to work with our team, they submit an application, or, you know, if they run into us at ABC here, we can, you know, talk about things in person. We usually do like a 20 to 30 minute formal onboarding call where we get their training history, you know, who they've worked with before, if they're dealing with injuries, such and, you know, so on and so forth. And then we talk about, you know, game plan when we would get started. Here's how things would go. You know, if you have a meet set in mind, you know, how the plan would be going towards that meet. And then every week we do a weekly check-in where an athlete submits videos of their top sets. We use a software called Loom where we can review said top sets in a live video and give our, you know, feedback on that, and we submit that back to the athlete. And if they have questions, you know, just to send questions. But yeah, I think that covers everything, right? I believe for coaching. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
What's that?
Giving out free samples.
No free samples. Yeah.
Small mic.
Next time.
Come on, please. Can I get a sniff?
No, it's perfect. I think we're on time. I'm actually gonna time myself.
And go.
And all right, we have the clicker.
Remember, Mike, the power of the pause. Just stand there and pause for like 10 seconds.
Just stare.
I know, right?
The power of the pause, bro.
All right. How's everyone feeling so far? I'm in like my like MC like voice right now, right? So I'm Mike Perkins. I know a lot of you know me as the MC at the local powerlifting meets, and as Jan said, nationally. Oh yeah, that's how you know me. But I'm also a registered dietitian. I was a national level powerlifter. I powerlifted competitively from 2015 until about 2020. My last big meet was the Arnold, where Jordan actually handled me. And then we did the Team Turkey Brawl. I think that was our last meet, which was a powerlifting meet that Bent Bar put on, where one person squatted, one person benched, and the other person deadlifted. So it was like the first ever team meet in the area. But that's the last time I competed. So I primarily focus on sports nutrition, but I also coach people. And so I'm also a professional nutrition coach. I also do professional coaching and counseling. But primarily I focus on sports nutrition, performance nutrition, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now. I do some weight loss and things like that also. But this is primarily powerlifting nutrition basics. So the first question we should ask is, why is nutrition important for powerlifters, right? So there's a few things. Well, one is, what do we got here? Getting clipped up.
Yeah.
Oh, I got the meat. I got
These
the mic
Italians coming
taken
out.
away from me. That usually doesn't happen for me. But
Italians coming out.
okay, so why is nutrition important for powerlifters? And if anyone wants to chime in too, you certainly can. But one is understanding how food and fluid, that's a big one that we're going to talk about, can affect athletic performance and optimize recovery. It's a crucial part of becoming a competitive athlete. So if you're really looking to become a powerlifter, you are going to be becoming an athlete, and so food is a big important part to that. Two is you will not get stronger or maximize your gains, quote unquote, if you aren't eating correctly, and we're going to talk a bit more about that. Three is, you train 3 or 5 times a week, maybe sometimes more, like Sean was saying. Some people are benching up to 7 times per week, right? But you eat at least 21 times per week, right? If you're eating 3 square meals per day, and most people are eating a lot more than that if you add snacks in. So you have a lot of micro, we'll say, decisions that you're making when it comes to your food on a daily basis. And 4 is, I trained for 3 years without paying attention to my nutrition at all. I used to be an athlete. I used to be a baseball player. And when I was in high school and going into college, I didn't focus as much on nutrition. But when I started focusing on nutrition, everything changed in terms of my athleticism. So that's actually why I got into nutrition in the first place. So going back to powerlifting, powerlifting is a weight class sport. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And how many people have actually competed in a powerlifting meet so far? So about half. How many people are actually interested in competing in a powerlifting meet? Is that pretty much everyone for the most part? Awesome. So one thing to keep in mind or take into consideration is that it is a weight class sport, right? So these are the weight classes. I'm not going to list them all out. When did these change? They changed last year again? Or like 2022? So before they were a little bit different. This is pretty standardized now. But one thing to keep in mind with weight classes is that you're going to have to make weight for a powerlifting meet, right? Now, what I always say to everyone, whether they're my athletes or just people who I'm talking to at the gym, is you should not cut weight for your first powerlifting meet. So keep that in mind. Anyone who's thinking about competing, highly, highly recommend that you do not cut weight for your first powerlifting meet, unless maybe you have experience with weight cuts, right? Maybe you are a wrestler or something along those lines. However, realistically, when people cut, you are going to lose a little bit of strength. Now, if you do it the right way, you probably won't. But if it's your first meet, there's a lot going on at the first meet, right? You're getting used to the rules. You might be meeting your coach for the first time. There's tons of things going on, and you really don't want to have to worry about weight cutting a couple days before, even leading up to the meet. You want to really maximize your gains that first meet, and even the second meet, to be honest. So this is honestly one of the biggest takeaways that I'm going to talk about today is hydration and how important hydration is for lifters. It's over the course of the years. I've been a dietitian now for about 6 years. I've been doing nutrition coaching for about 6 years and just in the nutrition space now for over 10 years. And hydration is an area where now I consider it the top priority for an athlete on a day-to-day basis. So hydration is just water and electrolyte balance within the body. It's one of the simplest ways and most effective techniques that you can enhance or even de-enhance your performance. So does anyone know why it would be so important for a powerlifter to have good hydration? Yeah, why not? We'll get everyone in. What's that? There you go. That's one reason, right? Cramping, pulling muscles. Anyone else? So the big part about hydration, let me see if I made the point here. This isn't working. There we go. So as little as 2% decrease in body weight from fluid loss can negatively impact your strength. So for example, if you're sweating in the gym, let's say you're working out, you're sweating, let's say you have a job in construction or something along those lines, you're sweating all day, you are going to lose probably about 5% of your strength if you aren't keeping hydrated. And that's on a day-to-day basis. Now, you could have a bad day of nutrition. Let's say you don't eat as much. But if you had a pretty good day the day before or even a couple days before, it's not going to affect your performance that much. If you're dehydrated, it's going to immediately affect your performance. So just keep that in mind. So, I mean, what that looks like, right? If you're someone who squats like 200 pounds, You might come in and you might be struggling with like 260 to 280, right? So being hydrated is really, really important. So we're going to talk about what dehydration looks like. So dehydration is basically when fluid intake doesn't match fluid loss. And here are some signs of dehydration: dry mouth or skin in general, just fatigue, muscle weakness, decreased urine output, deep yellow concentrated urine, dizziness, and headaches. And I have this urine color chart on here, which, you know, is very interesting to say the least, but it's very important to keep this in mind. Realistically, you want your urine to be like this clear or pale yellow, right? Once you start getting into these areas, bright yellow, orange, if your pee is tea colored, you should probably see your doctor, let's be honest. But even in this area, you should be trying to bring it up to the more pale yellow or clear, because that's when you're optimally hydrated. Now, you can be overhydrated, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But who is most likely to become dehydrated? It's athletes, it's people who are working outside in hot or humid environments, but athletes are at extra risk because you're going to be sweating and whatnot. So this is a big takeaway for this presentation, is developing a personal hydration plan. So fluid needs, they vary from person to person. You probably have gone to your doctor and they've said something like, what have they said? Does everyone know? Drink how many cups per day? 8. It's 8. Typically a doctor is going to say drink 8 cups per day. It's about 64 ounces. But for an athlete, it's going to be much more than that. And when I say fluid, I'm not just talking about water. I'm talking about everything that you drink throughout the day. So that might be diet soda, it might be tea, it might be coffee, and things like that. So that's what we mean by fluid. So one easy way to do this, and you might want to take out your phone and take a little note, but it's 2/3 of your body weight in pounds in fluid ounces. So, you know, for me, I'm about 170 pounds. If I multiply that by 0.66, let's say, it comes out to about 100, 110 ounces per day. So that's a good place to start. Now, when it comes to calculations, calculations are calculations too, right? So it's not necessarily personalized. So one way that we talk about, or that I talk to my athletes about, is you should have around like 3 to 5 clearish or that kind of yellow palish peas per day. So kind of if you keep track of that, you're going to be well hydrated. But keep that in mind, 2/3 of your body weight in fluid ounces. So here's an example, 150-pound athlete times 0.66, 99 ounces per day. It's just as easy as that. And then you can add a little bit more if you need to, or you can take a little bit away. You can kind of go back and forth, right? So a couple other things to keep in mind. If you are working out for longer than 2 hours or you sweat a lot, you should probably bring a sports drink. So that's like a Gatorade or a Powerade, but you can also make your own. There's an easy way to make a sports drink would be like taking a little bit of orange juice, putting water in that, and then adding like a little bit of table salt. 1/4 of a teaspoon of table salt is about like 400 to 500 milligrams of sodium. So keep that in mind too. Oh, the other pro tip that I have is to purchase a semi-expensive water bottle. So we have a hydro flask here. This is like $30 or $40. The reason I say purchase a semi-expensive water bottle is because you're going to keep it around. This is the one I use personally. It's this Camelback. It has this little like nipple on there. But you know, you can use things like this too. But anyways, so the whole point of that, right, is that it's a little bit more expensive. You're not going to leave it somewhere. You're going to carry it around. You got a water bottle right there, right? You just carry it around with you, and you end up staying hydrated. It just works out that way. So that's my pro tip. True or false? I'm getting the crowd involved here. That's how I do things. You should begin to drink when you feel thirsty. There you go. I heard a false, though. So it is false. So if you feel thirsty, you're already in the first stage of dehydration. So keep that in mind. You should just be, like Tammy said, drinking throughout the day. And that's when having your water bottle comes in. So we're going to talk a little bit about calories. Okay, I'm doing good in time.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, what's the question?
So obviously this is a manipulation body weight trick. What about water cuts?
We'll bring that up towards the end because that's a little bit advanced. So water cut. So but what he's saying is a water cut, which is also known as an acute weight loss manipulation technique, which is like, let's say you're at a weight class of 181. That's what I competed at, but 2 days before I'm 190 pounds. Well, I'm going to manipulate my water and other like food intake to then weigh in at 181. But once again, if you're new to powerlifting, don't worry too much about water cuts or acute weight loss techniques. It's more of an advanced technique. But I'll answer questions towards the end. Yeah, Renee.
On the protein side, you mentioned electrolytes.
Yes.
How important is that compared to just drinking plain water?
So electrolytes are important, and that's a good question. I'm going to come back to that and how to make sure that you're in an electrolyte balance. So electrolytes are potassium, sodium, magnesium, chloride, etc. If you're eating a well-rounded diet, you're not going to have to worry as much about like drinking or adding electrolytes to things. I know that's like a hot topic now. You have like, what is it, liquid IV and prime hydration and all these like things now are in vogue. But if you're eating the right foods, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, that's a good point, you're going to be fine with just drinking water. So calories are a measurement of energy that we acquire from eating food. This is eating good, so that's a little mess up on me. But calories are overall most important when we're thinking about our nutrition. Protein is very important too. But calories are king, as they say. Not all foods are created equal in regards to calories, right? Obviously, like baby carrots and ice cream are much different calorie-wise, right? Ice cream might be like you didn't know that, Jan? Yeah, sorry about that. Anyways, that little pint of Ben and Jerry's will put you back a little bit. But one thing that's interesting to know is the weight that the different macronutrients carry, right? So one of our macronutrients is protein. There's 4 calories per gram of protein. There's 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate, but there's 9 calories per gram of fat. So fats are almost double when it comes to caloric amount than the other two. Now that doesn't mean that fats are bad by any means. It's just good to understand that when we're looking at different types of foods. What's up, buddy? Oh, that's a good point. So alcohol is 7 grams or 7 calories per 1 gram. So alcohol is kind of like the ugly stepchild, as they say, of the macronutrients. They don't really call it that. But alcohol doesn't just go away when you drink it. It is quite heavy. It actually almost carries as much calories as fat. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now that doesn't mean that you can't drink alcohol. You just have to kind of be strategic with it, right? If you're gonna have a day where you do a lot of binge drinking, maybe not eat as much that day. But anyways, yeah. So alcohol, that's a good point. So alcohol will dehydrate you too. So you probably shouldn't be drinking too much the day that you're lifting or the day before you're lifting, unless you're into that. I don't really judge anyone. But in terms of optimal performance, you probably shouldn't be drinking the day of or the day before. But you can certainly drink after your meet. Anyone drink after their meet? Oh, definitely. Why not, right? Perfect. The deed is done. So protein is very, very important. In terms of macronutrients, once again, our macronutrients are proteins, carbs, and fats. When it comes to lifting weights, whether you're powerlifting or you're just lifting in the gym or you're crossfitting, whatever, you need to get in enough protein. This is because amino acids are what are the building blocks of proteins. So if we look at like a little Lego piece, right, that's all done, let's say a little Lego spaceship, those little Legos that put that together are called amino acids, and we need all the amino acids. There's 21 essential amino acids to build muscle. And that's just for building muscle, general physiological functions, all that fun stuff. So protein is important though because it builds and repairs muscle. That's the biggest thing. So for example, if you're working out in the gym and you're not eating enough protein, well, what's going to happen is that your body is going to break down your muscle that you already have in order to feed these physiological processes. So working out generally is a very, very good thing, right? However, if you're working out and you're not eating enough protein, you're actually going to lose a lot of your lean mass, which isn't good for overall health. So eating enough protein is important. I'm going to talk about how you can calculate exactly how much protein that you need. So here are some examples of protein foods. Fish, poultry, meat alternatives, so things like tofu or different things. Someone just said, ugh, yeah. But there's literally a section now in most grocery stores that say meat alternatives. Eggs, dairy, legumes, nuts, seeds, quinoa. So for breakfast, you might have things like eggs, turkey bacon, Greek yogurt, with some fruit on the bottom. I added that. Almonds, walnuts, cottage cheese, low-fat cheeses, high-protein cereals, low-fat milks, or really any types of milks. And then lunch and dinner, you might, and obviously, like, if you're going to eat some of these things for breakfast, I'm not judging. I'm just saying what's general. Grilled chicken, canned tuna, baked salmon, lean steak or hamburger, baked pork, deli roll, beans, lentils, tofu, edamame, noodles, Boca meatless crumbles. I might get another from that, and some low-fat cheese. So these are all, if you're like, oh, I don't know like what I should be eating protein-wise, these are all great options protein-wise. They're going to help you reach your protein goal. Obviously, there's things like protein powders too. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And these supplements up here, I'm not endorsing any of these. No, do that around. I'm not a big fan of that brand. But anyways, I got that for free. I'm going to be honest. I got that for free. But I'm going to talk about that in a second. No, I have no affiliation with the brands, but we're going to talk about supplements. That's why those are up there. Okay, so carbohydrates. Whoops, I don't know how that happened. All right. So carbohydrates are not bad, even though in vogue everyone seems to think they are. Hold on. Okay. So a carbohydrate is a simple and they're simple and complex molecules that create energy for your body. The importance, they're needed to fuel exercise. Now, if you are on something like a ketogenic diet, which is we're not going to get into today, the fats will fuel your exercise. However, for most people, a balanced diet is going to work well for you. And if you are doing a balanced diet of proteins, carbs, and fats, the carbohydrates are what are going to fuel your body, fuel your workout. So it's super important that we get in enough carbs on a day-to-day basis. So they optimize the optimized storage form of energy, and then of course promotes mental clarity during training. So carbs during exercise, this is hitting the wall, even though this is typically only going to happen to like an endurance athlete, not a power lifter. But sometimes it will happen to a power lifter if you're not eating enough. You'll start to notice fatigue and some mental fatigue, physical fatigue, all those things. You probably need some carbs. So our bodies store approximately 350 grams of glycogen in the muscle. Glycogen is a fancy term for just the storage form of carbohydrates in our body. And low carbohydrates equals fatigue, right? So we just went over that. Or hitting the wall like this guy. So the big takeaway here is that low carbohydrate intake can hurt your performance. And we're going to get into what are some common carb-containing foods. And what I will say is one thing that I talk to my athletes about, I'm not sure if this is in this, but you know, if you are eating meal, let's say that your meal timing before your training is like, let's say you have lunch at 12 o'clock and you're training at 3 o'clock, you're probably going to be okay. Now, if you're going more than 3 hours without eating a whole meal before training, you should probably pack some snacks. And snacks would be anything like an apple. You want things that are more like simple carbohydrates or easier digesting carbohydrates if you're going to eat, let's say, like an hour or so before your training. So let's say, so for me, you know, when I used to work in an office, I used to eat probably around like 11 or 12, and then I would train around like 5. So I always had to eat something before I left around like 4 or so. And that would typically be a higher carb-containing meal, or sometimes it would only be carbohydrates. So some examples of simple carbohydrates or fast digesting and quick energy: sugar, honey, candy bars, white bread, white rice, white pasta, white potatoes, candy, baked goods, soda, fruit juice, things like this. These are very quick digesting carbohydrates. Now, complex carbs, we're not going to get into polysaccharides, but are things like brown rice, whole wheat breads, beans, wheat pastas, fiber, breakfast cereals, vegetables, oatmeals, fruits, all these things. The big difference between these two is that the complex carbs typically have fiber in them, and fiber is going to slow the digestion process, whereas the simple carbs don't have much fiber, have like 1 gram or less, so it's going to digest much more rapidly. Simple carbs you can typically eat within 30 minutes to an hour before you work out, and you're going to be quite good. Complex carbs is more of like 2 to 3 hours before the workout. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, if you're eating whole meals, so the meal has, let's say, proteins in it, fats, combinations of simple and complex carbs, then that's going to probably be like 2 or 3 hours of the digestion process. So that's something to keep in mind. If you only have like 30 minutes to an hour before you work out, you should focus on the simple carbs. And I know Sean had mentioned, like at a meet, you're probably going to be eating more simple carbs because you don't have much time between each lift, right? Especially because USA Powerlifting is a 2-hour weigh-in. Even though you have a 2-hour weigh-in, realistically, you're probably only going to have about 30 minutes to eat before you actually start warming up and stretching and all that stuff. So keep that in mind too. The other thing is that typically at a powerlifting meet, you're going to be feeling a little bit more stressed, even though our coaches would probably not want that to be happening, but just in general, you might have a little stage fright, etc. When we're more stressed, our digestion process slows down a little bit. So that's another reason why simple carbs are very important. All right, so how much time? I'm doing okay on time. One big thing that I would like you guys to take away, if you're not super familiar with nutrition labels, is to understand the nutrition label, right? So it's pretty straightforward. The new nutrition labels are a lot more consumer friendly versus business friendly. We have calories right on top. Serving sizes are easier to understand, but the biggest thing you should keep in mind is what a serving size looks like, what are the calories of a certain food, right? And then you also want to keep in mind protein and, of course, carbs like we talked about before. So one thing I would recommend is start looking at nutrition labels, get used to them, see like, what certain foods, how certain foods differ from others. Just see like, something to keep in mind, maybe take some notes on it. I'm going to do a quick demonstration at some point on how to like measure food, but one important part to keep in mind in terms of like athletic performance is what's called energy availability. And so energy availability is the amount of energy an athlete has for both sports activities and activities of daily life, right? So if you're someone who has a job where you're moving a lot, let's say whether you're doing construction or you're in and out of your car, my day job is I'm a traveling salesman, so like I'm in and out of my car quite a bit, and I can get like 10,000 plus steps a day pretty easily. So for me, my energy availability can be actually pretty low if I'm not keeping those things in mind, whereas if you're someone who might work at like an office and you're not getting as many steps in, your energy availability might be a little bit higher, so you might not need as many calories. So this is something to keep in mind. If you have lower energy availability, you're going to have to eat more carbs or eat more calories in general. Higher energy availability, you won't have to eat as many calories, and we'll talk more about calories in a second. But it's important to assess your energy availability at the beginning of training sessions. And some common symptoms of low energy availability, which are similar to what we talked about with like lower carb intake, is chronic fatigue, poor performance, weight loss, irritability, stress fractures, things like that, recurring illnesses, depression. All of these things can happen if you're in a lower energy availability. If you're finding that you're having some of these symptoms, and you're training, you might want to increase your calories. Oops, what was that? Okay, we don't have to worry about that. So this is a big part. This is a nice takeaway too. So I'd say, if you want to, pull out your notepad on this one. But understanding your energy requirements, especially as an athlete, is really important. So one way that we can do that is we can calculate our maintenance calories. So I have a couple steps here that we can do. One is that you can use a predictive equation, which comes with like activity factors, but the Mifflin-St. Jean equation is one of the more researched equations. So if you just Google Mifflin-St. Jean calculators, you'll probably be able to find one online. So it's pretty, and then what they do is that you'll just put in your height, your weight. They'll ask for like an activity factor, which is basically like how often you're, how active you are. So how many times you're working out, how many times you're doing cardio, different things like that. And then it'll spit out a number that would be your maintenance calories. So for most people, that's going to be somewhere between, let's say, like 1,600 or 1,700 all the way up to like, let's say, like 3,500 or so, somewhere in between that range. But of course, everyone's very, very different. So that's one step that you can use. Two is you can use calorie to body weight ranges and activity multipliers yourself. So one way to do this, and this is something that you could do today, for example, is that you could multiply your body weight in pounds by 10, and then you can multiply the number from step 1 by an activity multiplier. So for example, for me, I would use an activity multiplier of, let's say, like 1.7, but this is like how they break out. So sedentary plus 3 to 6 days of weightlifting is 1.3 to 1.6, all the way to very active as 1.9 to 2.2. And I have an example on the next slide of what that looks like, but that's a simple way to like increase your calories, to calculate your calories. So this is, and this is just also if you were going to calculate macros and whatnot, these are some good ideas. So I know that we talked about earlier protein, how much protein you should be eating per day. The typical recommendation is between 0.7 and 1 grams per pound of body weight. That's the pretty typical recommendation these days. And even 1 gram per pound of body weight is probably higher than most people need. Typically somewhere right in between that range, like 0.85-ish, is pretty good for most people. But even if you're at 0.7, you're going to be okay. Typically, if you're maintaining your weight or gaining weight, you're going to be lower on the end of the protein scale. And if you're losing weight or in, let's say, a weight loss phase or you're cutting, you want to be higher on the protein scale. Fats are typically somewhere between like 25 and 30% of calories. And then carbohydrates are about like 50 to 65% of total calories. You want a minimum of 1 gram per pound typically as an athlete, and that's still very, very low. Most athletes should be eating well over 200, 300 plus carbohydrates, depending on the person. So this is what like calculating calories would look like for me anyway. So I'm about 173 pounds. I'm going to use that second step that I talked about in the other slide. So step 1 would be 173 times 10. So that would give me a very baseline calorie amount. So 1730, basically what I would need just to kind of like survive. So 1730 calories. Then I'm going to take that number and multiply it by an activity multiplier. Now, I used 1.6 just because I kind of know exactly where my maintenance calories are, just because it's something that I track and do, obviously. So I used 1.6, which I think that was like, let's say, lifting like 3 to 4 times a week, maybe doing cardio a couple times a week, but also like probably getting in like 7 to 10,000 steps a day or so. So my maintenance calories, what I need to just like maintain my weight, is about 2,768 calories. Now, right now I'm in a bulking phase, so I've increased my calories to about 2,900 to 3,000 per day to gain about, let's say, like a half a pound a week. So that's something to keep in mind. I would definitely recommend that you play around with this, and this does get a little bit complicated. So like you can always, hire a dietitian or talk to a nutrition coach to kind of really get a more streamlined number. But this is a good place to go if you're really not sure how many calories you should be eating. And then here's a pro tip. This is something that I pretty much recommend to all my clients or anyone who I just start working with is you should track your calories for at least 1 month to get an idea of like what, portion sizes and what certain foods look like. A lot of people get very surprised when they start tracking their calories. It's like, oh wow, I didn't realize like that's how many calories were in that food. And even just, if you were just to do this for 1 month and then you never do it again, you'd have a very strong understanding of like what certain foods look like, and you'd be able to eyeball foods a bit better overall. So it's something that I highly, highly recommend. So, this is like a little phrase I put on here. If you do budget your money, most people do, why wouldn't you budget for your food, right? So it's something to kind of keep in mind. So what I would recommend is you should purchase a food scale, download an app. I personally recommend Chronometer because it's free and they still offer a free food database, which a lot of apps don't offer anymore. And aim to track at least 3 days per week, including 1 weekend day. So we don't even have to track every day, but if you do 2 weekdays and then 1 weekend day, it'll give you a little bit of a better idea of what certain portion sizes look like and what your day-to-day might look like versus, you might be surprised. You might think, I typically eat like a couple thousand calories a day. Then you start tracking, you're like, oh wow, I'm actually eating 4,000 calories a day, which can happen very quickly. So, right, like like for example, yeah, the typical little Ben and Jerry's pint, right, is about 1,000 calories. So believe that or not. And now actually, businesses have to put on what the total calories are in any type of like packaged food like that, whereas before they used to be able to just put how many calories were for like X amount of servings, right? So that the nutrition labels just changed recently because of that. So what do we got? 130. Okay. I'm going to give a quick example of what this looks like. Does anyone want to come up and weigh some food with me quick? It'll take like 1 minute. Yeah, come on up. Why not? What's that? Like I have like a scale. Yeah. So this is what we're talking about. This is how easy this can be. So this is what I'm talking about. Basic food scale, they're like $10 on Amazon, or you can even go to Walmart, right? And so this is a very simple demonstration because I have a bag of Cheetos here, and this is already like pre-portioned out. But this is what I had in my pantry that I wanted to use. But anyway, so let's take a look here. The serving size for this is just like one package, but regardless, it's probably, we'll see how much it weighs, right? So I'll let you kind of crack it open.
Well, the package says it weighs 28.3 grams.
28.3 grams. So that's what a serving size would be. So typically if you had like a big bag, right, it would say on there, oh, there's probably 7 servings and they're like 28 grams each. So let's do this here. Let's give it a little try. This is how simple this process is. And there we go.
It says 28 grams.
28 grams, just like that. And so now you would just know. So just doing that process, you would then just write that down, put it in an app, whatever, and you can do that throughout the day to get an idea of, you know, how much you're eating. Or if you do end up calculating your calories, you can then kind of know, like, okay, this is how I can stay on track. Anyone want some Cheetos? Who's into Cheetos?
60 calories worth.
You're going to take the Cheetos with you. Perfect, yeah.
Great. is that my party gift?
Yeah, it is. Give them a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. That was incredible. But that's like I said, that's a big pro tip, because it's very easy to have things around the house, right? Like Cheetos, let's say, and to eat like a whole bag, and before you know it, you just had like 1,000 calories of Cheetos versus like that was like 170 or so, which is still a good amount that fit on the whole plate. So it's good to be mindful of our foods, especially when you're getting into performance-based nutrition and you're starting to get a little bit more mindful about certain foods and how they affect your performance. Because if you eat too much food, you're going to be sluggish in the gym. If you don't eat enough, well, you're also going to be sluggish, but in another way, in a fatigued way. So let me just see what else I have here. I'm just going to do these 2 slides. This is jumping all over the place. And I'll let Kevin jump up here. Okay, so nutrition at your first meet. These are my 4 big tips. Yes?
I'm sorry. I just have a question in regards to protein intake. Like,
Yeah.
at what point, you were talking about portions and
Mm-hmm.
protein, carbs, and fats. At what point in your protein intake does like gluconeogenesis actually kick in? Like, how much is too much?
So I would...
Starts converting it into fats.
Yeah, so usually that's usually going to happen, so it can happen, if you eat way too much, but also if you don't eat enough, right? So I would say, probably around like 1.4-ish grams per pound, yeah. That's not an exact answer, that's just like me, going off, but in the recent years, the research in regards to protein has changed quite a bit, where some people thought that you needed a lot more than you actually do. It's through, there's tons of research now showing that 0.7 to like 1 gram is going to overall be pretty good. The only time you'd want to really go over 1 gram is, let's say you are like cutting and you're using protein as like a satiating food, because proteins tend to be much more satiating than a lot of other foods. So you can eat like, let's say you eat like a whole 4 ounces of chicken breast, that's typically going to be like 100 calories, but that's going to probably keep you full for a couple hours, you know. So some people will use protein to be more satiating, but like for example, if you're like a 200-pound lifter, I really wouldn't go over like 220 to 230 grams. You know, I think protein foods are also quite expensive, so in my opinion, you're also kind of like wasting money in that sense. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Because you might as well just do fats and carbs at that point. Yeah. Yep. That's a good question. So these are my four, kind of like my 4 golden rules at your first powerlifting meet. So one is do not eat or drink anything that you haven't had before. So this can happen because you might be at a meet, you might be making friends, right? And then someone's like, hey, why don't you try this like Moe's burrito? And you're like, oh, I've never had Moe's before. Let me give this a try, right? And then before you know it, you're actually vomiting on the platform. So that happens many times. You know, so anyway, so that's my goal. That's honestly my golden rule is do not eat or drink anything that you haven't had before. I also don't recommend ordering food from a restaurant because you never know. You could get food poisoning, right? It might not, it doesn't usually happen, but it could happen that day. So you might as well just prepare your own foods or have foods that are, you know, pre-made that you bring with you. I remember I was at a meet once where this kid, we weighed in, and he like called up the local diner immediately, and he was ordering pancakes and bacon and this and that and the third, and I don't think he had a great squat session after that. So just, you know, bring basic foods that you're used to eating. Number 2 is have a well-rounded and nutrient-dense meal about 2 or 3 hours before weigh-ins. Now this is your first meet, right? So you're not really worried about your weight, like we said. Like, yes, you do have to weigh in, but you shouldn't worry about making weight at your first meet. So that means that you can really optimize your nutrition before the weigh-in. So typically you want to have a nice whole meal 2 to 3 hours before weigh-in. So that might look like something like a bagel with some eggs, some orange juice, things like that. Think about a whole meal with carbs, fats, and proteins. So this meal should consist of 3 or 4 ounces of protein, 1 or 2 servings of complex carbs, right? Because you have like a few hours before you start competing. So something like oatmeal or fruit, right? And then do not stuff yourself or overeat. The last thing you want is to be like bloated going into your powerlifting meet, and then you can't fit into your belt, right? That you just spent $200 on. So number 3 is during the meet, you will primarily eat simple or low fiber carbohydrates. So some of these examples include bananas, apples, dried fruits, rice cakes, pretzels, white bread, applesauce, gummy candies, or even sports drinks, things like Gatorade, right? So very like simple carbohydrates, but once again, you're only going to have like 15 or 20 or 30 minutes before you start getting ready for the next lift, so you want to have something that's easily digestible, that's not going to fill you up too much either, because you don't want to be bloated on the platform. And then proper hydration throughout the powerlifting meet is key, so be sure to bring an appropriate amount of water or sports drink, and then drink as necessary, but of course don't overdrink either, because then you're going to be a bit uncomfortable. So 12 to 16 ounces per hour is typically a good starting point to be at. And this, once again, doesn't really tie into people who are doing like a weight cut or an acute weight cut or water cut like Jan had mentioned. And then for supplements, this is going to be the last slide I do have other slides, but you do not necessarily need them, right? They're called supplements for a reason. They do supplement your overall diet, and there are thousands of supplements out there, and the majority of the supplement industry is just trying to get your hard-earned dollars. So these are the top 3 recommendations, and really pretty much all you would typically need. So one would be protein powder. Jordan, hold up the protein powder for me. So protein powder, so in the case that you can't get in enough protein throughout the day through the whole foods, like we had mentioned before, you might do like a scoop or 2 of protein powder. So a scoop of protein powder is anywhere from like 20 to 30 grams of protein. So typically I will do like 1 scoop of protein powder a day, and then I'll make sure like 2 or 3 of my meals have like, let's say 3 to 6 ounces of protein from typically meat sources. And then protein bars are good too. Creatine monohydrate, you should definitely, of course, check in like with your doctor or your other healthcare professional before doing something like creatine, but Totally legal, totally safe supplement. It basically is one of the ways that you can just get a little bit more energy into your muscles at the gym. Typically what creatine does once it saturates into your system, let's say that you can typically lift or bench press 200 pounds for 8 reps. Once you're taking creatine and saturate into your system, you can then do 200 for like 10 reps. So over the course of, let's say a whole 12-week training cycle, that's going to make a pretty big difference overall. Creatine also does give you like a little bit more of like a muscular look too. So it's kind of fun that way. And then the other one would just be like caffeine, right? So whether it's from caffeine pills or from coffee or whatever, caffeine is an ergogenic aid. So that means if you take enough of it, let's say like 200 milligrams or so, it will affect your performance in a positive way. So there's a ton of research behind that too. Now obviously there's a lot of companies who utilize pre-workout, but the biggest thing about pre-workout is the caffeine in that thing. So you can buy tabs of caffeine for like $7. I think there's like 240 in there versus like a tub of pre-workout that's like $50 for 30 servings. So that could save you some money. Yes.
Don't confuse your creatine with your caffeine.
Yes, definitely not. Yeah. It'll happen to the best of people. That's for sure. Especially if you're taking your creatine at night. Yeah.
Do whey proteins have a higher utilization rate than plant protein powders, or are they more or less the same?
It depends. That's a good question. So whey protein is a very, I guess, it has all of the amino acids, right? So the 21 essential amino acids. Most plant-based proteins at this point do as well, because it's usually like a mix of like pea proteins and soy proteins and things like that. So for the most part, you're going to get what you need from both types. Like if you are a vegan or you're a vegetarian, you shouldn't be too worried about doing the plant-based proteins. However, I will say that if you are someone who does do dairy, does do meat, the whey protein is probably going to be the better way to go. But it's a very small margin. So, yeah. But whey protein, which comes from milk, is a very, very strong quality protein source. So that's what we typically have even in baby formulas. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on caffeine consumption during the meet? Like, obviously at the gym is going to be one thing, but over the course of like a 4-hour.
Yeah. So you shouldn't do more than you're used to, right? Because then you're kind of a nervous wreck, typically. So what I typically recommend to my athletes is, maybe do like what you're typically used to before squatting, and then before deadlifting, you do that same amount again. So like for me, I'm typically used to doing about 100 milligrams per day, which is like a little bit more than an 8-ounce cup of coffee. So I might do a little bit, like 1 or 2 cups, let's say, before I squat, and then that'll kind of carry me through bench, and then I'll do another cup. I know other people drink a ton of caffeine, right? So some people like Jan, he's doing like maybe 5 monsters. So, but to answer your question, you shouldn't do more than you're used to for sure, but it is an ergogenic aid, so it does help with performance. So I would recommend that if you're used to caffeine, you do caffeine on meet day, yes. Yep. All right, I want to give Kevin his limelight. So I know that we're going to do more questions at the end, so if you have any more questions for me, I will be right over here. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. So I didn't know that we could make presentations, so I don't have one.
You can always make presentations.
Yeah, I know. I didn't know we had that. So my name's Kevin. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I've been involved with powerlifting for 10 years now, I think was the first time I ever competed. I did one in 2007, but I didn't know what I was doing then. There was a high school football coach said, "Hey, go do this thing, kid." I was like, "All right, sure." So then I actually started competing pretty regularly back in 2013. I've been a physical therapist for 5 years at this point. Really what I want to talk about today is kind of the rate of injury in powerlifting and trying to dispel some common beliefs and myths about being injured, and kind of how to go about training and responding to an injury if they do happen. So just to kind of gauge the room, how often do you think someone would get hurt training for powerlifting? Anyone got any guesses? Once every year. Definitely less than running. I would agree with that. Yeah, so there are a lot of ways, and we'll talk about how you can minimize the risk of injury. One of the things you want to always be cautious about is that if anyone ever tries to sell you on injury prevention, right? There's no way to prevent an injury, but there is a ways to reduce the risk of injury. So powerlifting, there's been a fair number of studies done. I did a little bit of research before this, and the rates are somewhere between 1 and 4.4 injuries per 1,000 hours of participation. All right, so if you do some quick math, if you're in the gym 3 times, 4 times a week for about 2 hours at a time, we're talking about, it takes about 2 to 2.5 years to get to about 1,000 hours. So you're getting injured anywhere between 1 and 4.4 times every 2.5 years. So you're anywhere between half an injury to 2 injuries a year. So it's relatively low. And for comparison, I did a little bit of other research on other kind of non-contact sports that adults will participate in. And running is about 7.7 injuries per 1,000 hours, right? So that's recreational running for 5Ks, 10Ks, things like that. And then Zumba is about 5.8 injuries per 1,000 hours of participation. All right, now I don't know if you're getting in that much Zumba in a week that you would for regular, like going to the gym with a barbell, but it's to say that powerlifting isn't inherently more dangerous than other activities that we can participate in. One of the other ones is Olympic weightlifting, right? So the difference is we do the bench press, squat, and deadlift. Olympic weightlifting is the snatch and clean and jerk, the one we see in the Olympics. They're about the same. They're 2.4 to 3.3 injuries per 1,000 hours. So all in the same ballpark. Powerlifting is pretty innocuous, is what we'll say. So things that are kind of common injuries that we can run into for powerlifting typically are going to be shoulder injuries, back injuries, and knee injuries. Those are the 3 most common injuries that people sustain when training, and usually those consist of some kind of strain of a muscle or a tendon, a sprain of a ligament, a tendinitis. Those are the more frequent things that you'll see. These are the little things here and there that aren't catastrophic. You're not going to have to go to the hospital. You don't need to go see a surgeon. They're just something that might make you take a step back, rest a little bit. But they are things that occur, and we want to know how to go about dealing with that. Right? We don't want to just say, oh, I got hurt, I'm just not going to do this ever again, because then that wouldn't be very fun. When it comes to ways to limit or reduce the risk of injury, right, they sound basic, but if you really look into it, it does help. Sleeping is huge, right? If you have a regular, good, kind of that traditional 6 to 8 hour, 6 to 9 hour sleep schedule every day, that makes a huge difference. That's when all the healing occurs, right? If you work a physical job, if you're sitting at work, right? Training, all of your recovery occurs for the most part while you're sleeping. Other things, nutrition, right, plays a big role in it. If you have a trash diet and you're eating, ice cream and bonbons, you're not going to have the protein to recover from the training. You're not going to have those nutrients, the vegetables, all of these other things that are helping us to stay healthy, right? So training and healthy go very, very hand in hand. Other things include hydration, and then you start getting into the nitpicky things in terms of how you train, frequency, intensity, load, exercise selection. All of these things have roles in injury prevention technique. So let me see what I got on my thing here. So for the common injuries that we have, does anyone have any questions on any injuries that they've ever had? Right? Everyone's got some sort of pull or injury or something they've had in the past. Anyone? If not, I'm going to kind of talk about some of the things. Yeah.
I'm curious as to belt stuff. 'Cause
Yeah.
I've never worn a belt, and I'm her. And I wanted to, and I started out later in life, so, but I've never used the belt, and then recently I blew my back out, and stopped, and I don't know what I did, but
Fair.
I got a video, so like, I still don't want to wear a belt, but I also, if it prevents injuries, and I'm open to a belt, so I'm
Yeah.
doing research, and there's all sorts of, yes, wear it, and the others,
No, don't worry. Yeah. Yeah, there's always a kind of contradicting viewpoints when you go on the internet. So, for the back, we'll say, we'll talk about a couple of the things that I hear as a physical therapist about the back. I hear people talk about slipping their disc, throwing their back out, right? Herniations, all these things. One of the big points I want people to take away is that our bodies are very resilient, right? Yeah, you can get hurt, but you can also recover from being hurt. And very rarely are any injuries like life sentences, right? The number of times I've heard someone come in, they're like, oh, I herniated my disc back in high school, and they're a 55-year-old man. Your back pain now is not the disc you herniated when you were 16, right? That's gone, that's recovered, that's kind of the way it is, right? This is something different, let's figure out what happened here. So for wearing a belt, right, for lifting, the whole point of the belt, and these guys can attest to it, is it helps to provide an external stimulus to create a strong abdominal brace. So it's not something that you want to like push against, latch down and tighten up super hard, right? That's kind of what you used to see with like furniture movers or construction workers and things like that. It's not a corset. It's not supportive in that physical sense. It's intended to be there to give you a little bit of extra pressure point to kind of brace against and to give feedback to, right? So you really want to have those strong abdominal muscles that maintain that spinal position so that you're able to bear load through your spine and through your torso safely, right? One of the ways that we talk about at work is our torso kind of acts like a soda can, right? If you have everything nice and lined up, right, and you put a load on it, it's going to support that load. If you dent that can either forward or hyperextending backwards, that can crumples right away. So that belt is there to help kind of make sure that you're using those muscles. Typically in weightlifting, we're going to round forward a little bit more because all the weight's in front. We're pushing us forward usually. That belt is to kind of help us make sure that we're keeping ourselves in a more upright position, in that neutral spine position. When you're competing or training, you want to limit in the barbell movement how much flexion and extension is occurring through the spine under that compressive load, right? When you're doing other exercises, you can get away with having some of that range of motion because there isn't that compression through the spine. And that's the difference and the nuance that comes with that. Other things, right, when you are training and you do sustain an injury, I always tell my patients that it's not the exercise that's bad, it's the dose that's bad, and how do you go about changing that dose? Right? I don't want someone to hurt themselves squatting or deadlifting and say, I just can't squat anymore. It's how do you squat without pain? How can we manipulate things so that you can keep doing it? So for deadlifting, for example, right, sometimes if you do have a herniated disc, typically bending forward is going to be painful just because of the mechanics of how a disc operates. So one of the ways that you can modify the deadlift so that you can still train those muscles, train that exercise, but not also hurt yourself, is you want to deadlift from a higher surface, right? You can put it on a block, you can put it on bigger plates so they're higher up. That way you don't have to bend down quite as much and you're able to maintain a more neutral spine position and tolerate that weight, but still not hurt yourself. And then you're going to want to see some sort of medical professional, whether it's a physical therapist, a chiropractor, an orthopedic surgeon, right? They can refer you to the right kind of healthcare practitioner to help recover from an injury. So I think that's kind of it. The big thing is just knowing that our bodies are able to recover from injury and you're able to work around them and be able to continue to do the exercises that we want safely. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Yeah, Jam, what's up? How many workouts can you push through before you do something about it? I would say earlier the better, right? Yeah, none, right? The right answer is none, right? You should probably see someone if you have a significant enough injury to hurt themselves. Usually I tell people if it bothers you for more than a week, then you really want to search someone out. We all get little tweaks and pulls and things that just go away, right? And you can keep going, but if it lingers for more than a week, then it's probably something more than nothing, and it needs a little bit more attention. Yeah.
If you can't tie your shoes,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Sean.
So, as coaches, we have lifters that have pain responses, and they're like two barriers to getting physical therapy. Number one, that's insurance or uninsurance. And it seems like a lot of PTs that are good at treating powerlifting injuries are not in network.
Yes.
So, I guess the second one being that no PTs are the same, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of PTs that focus on like geriatric or injury or workplace injuries, and so a lot of times they end up spinning their wheels with respect to care and getting the direct, immediate, and benefiting care that they need. So can you speak a little bit about what you should be looking for in a PT when you're like injured and you're powerlifter?
So one of the things, and I agree, you're going to, just like any medical professional or any profession ever, you're going to run the gambit of people who are really great at what they do and jive well with what your goals are. And there are other people who are just going to kind of brush it under the rug and give you this carpet answer that doesn't really help. So for me, one of the things that I would recommend looking forward in a physical therapist is someone that listens, right? You need someone that hears what you're talking about, what your goals are, what you do, how you hurt yourself, and what you want to accomplish at the end of the therapy. So I think having a good communication with a therapist and someone that listens is the most important part. The other part is you want someone who is going to work with you to get to your goals, not push kind of their agenda. So a lot of the times you'll hear your doctor say, oh, this hurts, just stop doing that, right? That's not a good answer. That's easy, right? Yeah, if you don't deadlift ever again, yeah, your deadlifts aren't going to hurt, right? You're going to want someone that's going to be able to help you reach your goals and come up with a game plan towards it, and then also work, if you do have a coach, with your coaches, right? Because it's all on the spectrum, right? Coaching is performance, right? Therapy is recovery, but eventually you have to bridge that gap from recovery to performance. So I think having that communication between all three, when I have any of Sean or Jordan's patients come see me, I make sure that they sign a release form that lets me talk with Jordan or Sean about their therapy, and we get their clearance for HIPAA, right? That allows me to talk with them about their medical care, because they're just as important role in their recovery as I am, and they are, right? Otherwise, they're going to be having them do, heavy rack pulls with a herniated disc, and I'm having them trying to do like core stabilization exercises. These are way opposite ends of the spectrum, and it's just going to kind of work against each other. So you want to make sure you have a team approach to your care. Any other questions?
I have a question about equipment, because I know like some stuff has to be like USAPL certified, like for meets, like they have to be certified, not certified, approved. Like does our equipment have to be approved, like checked?
nailed that one. With regard to equipment in USA Powerlifting, when we left the IPF, we no longer have basically a list of what's good and what's not. So essentially, as long as it meets our specifications, and all of our specifications are in the rule book, if you have a belt, you're probably fine. We allow Velcro now. You know, there's no really, you have to have Pioneer versus Titan, or, you know, Ying versus Yang. You don't need to worry about that. Wrist wraps are, again, there's a maximum length that they can't exceed. So those are things you need to think about. But pretty much any wrist wraps that you buy from anybody are going to be fine. Knee sleeves, they can't exceed a maximum length. So what's like 7? I think what they 7 millimeters. So whatever they happen to be, if you stick with the core, you know, A7, SBD, Inzer, Iron Rebel, you know, anybody out there that's making sleeves that you're seeing any lifter use, other than something from, say, lifting large that are like a multiply kind of a knee sleeve, you're going to be fine. Neoprene all the way, 100%. Singlets as well. So singlets, as long as they don't have, there's a company, so Virus has a singlet that we do not allow. It's a female one, and it's on the back, there's webbing, and the reason why, it's no longer a one-piece singlet. So it's got multiple layers, and it's got straps and everything. As far as like, so we've got wrist gear, wrist wraps, belts, knee sleeves, shoes. The only thing that is really off limits are boots, Crocs for Gabby, and like those toe shoes. So you can wear deadlift socks, you can wear deadlift slippers. You have to have something on your feet, but you know, pretty much everything else is fine. We see people. I mean, I've seen people up there with running shoes. Probably the worst thing to wear on the worst thing to wear on a platform. But I mean, as long as you check our rule book as far as like what the specs happen to be, anything you're going to buy on the open market, you're going to be fine with. Anybody else? So I want to cover some of the questions that people sent in. So one of the questions that was sent in was, and I think we may have already covered this, is thoughts on cardio and powerlifting and how they affect one another. You can take it.
So a lot of times, like, Jesus Christ. So a lot of times, like, for a very large part of my career, I was just like, hey, like, you probably shouldn't do cardio while also pursuing like a full-time strength program. But that's actually probably been the biggest thing that shifted in my thought process. I think that focusing on getting over 7,000 steps per day is a great start to making sure that you're feeling conditioned and that you're actually working your heart to a degree. And generally sticking to low intensity, steady state cardio is totally fine. Post-workout, it actually could benefit your recovery as well. So as long as we're not doing any kind of like CrossFit style workouts, either before or post workouts or whatever the case is, you should be okay. And it actually would probably benefit your recovery if you were to do that type of thing.
So the next one, this is actually another one for you two. How to decide your jumps in warm-ups as well as the amount of reps that you can do.
Yeah, I can do it. I think warm-ups specifically really depend on the type of person that you are. I've always been a big believer in less is more, just because of how many times in a given week you're doing the same exact exercise, usually around the same load for the same amount of reps. Or, you know, if you're a person that works with percentages, that probably is not going to change that much week to week. If you work with RPE, also something that's probably not going to change much week to week. For example, like let's say your max on something is 200 kilos. I would generally recommend, not including the bar, anywhere from five, maybe 6 warm-ups from bar to 200 kilos. Generally resting anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes for the first 2 to 3 warm-ups, as your body's just, you know, your body's being reminded what you're doing, and it doesn't need that long to rest in between loads that are less than, you know, 50% of the working weight that you're going to be using. Generally, when you get to like warm-ups 4 and 5, maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and then that last warm-up in between your last warm-up and your working set, maybe like 4 to 5 minutes. Typically, when it's high-intensity singles, I think that's the only time it really may change. Maybe give yourself a little bit more time just for mental preparation as well, just because it can be a little bit more intimidating when you see numbers close to, at, or above your maximum weight on a bar. And then in terms of reps, usually those first, 1 to 3, 4 warm-ups, right, it tapers off. I usually tell my athletes to do the bar for as many as you're comfortable doing. That first warm-up after, 4 to 6, then like 3 to 5, 2 to 3, and then generally singles for the last maybe 2 or 3 warm-ups sometimes.
Good. So we also hit on, there was a question about resources, and we hit on a bunch of those. Question on depth on squat and how long the bench pause is. There is no time limit. It is until the bar is close.
Like Sean touched on when he gave his part on the bench, you want to do what you can to touch as soft as you can on your chest. The better that you are able to touch soft on your chest, the quicker that you can come to a dead stop, the quicker that you'll get a press command in a meet.
100%. So this is more towards the older folks here. I know Tammy's here. Hey, take it easy. So there was some questions about, so specifically to the older crowd in terms of training and staying injury-free, what kind of advice would you offer, older lifters into their 60s, 70s, 80s?
So I have some personal I have some personal experience with this because I coach 3 highly nationally ranked masters lifters. That's anywhere between 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 70. Generally speaking, not a lot changes in terms of programming. More often than not, I find that less is more. So they can handle, you want to pay attention to their recovery and how well they're progressing on a week-to-week basis. So the 2 things I'll offer is, number 1, a little bit less work than the average lifter, and number 2, a faster deload schedule than the average lifter. So deloading probably every 3 to 4 weeks as opposed to 4 to 6 weeks, which is what we see average-wise, just as a way to continue progressing and to continue managing fatigue. And for those that may not know, a deload is usually a planned week of lower training, and it's a way for you to take one small step back to continue taking multiple steps forward in your programming.
Breakthrough peaks.
Whoever asked that question, did you have any follow-ups on that? Does that answer?
They may not be here, I don't know.
They might not be here.
Most of the other questions were basically somebody wanted some bench tips. That's secret sauce right there. I don't know. That's training. I mean, that's more is more, honestly, as far as that's concerned. There was some questions about the first competitions. I would say anything to any athlete that's ever emailed me ever that want to be involved, go to a meet. Watch it. Don't participate. Just go watch it and just watch everything that's going on. Because, what's that? Oh yeah, so the next one that's going to be here is going to be an all-day affair. It's a rookie ruckus. It's a rookie and novice meet, so first-time lifter, second time a meet in USA Powerlifting. We have about 80 lifters. We're starting lifting at 8 a.m. We're probably going to be done around 8 p.m. It's going to be a very long day. Be prepared, guys and gals. But the demand was huge, and we sold that meet out in a week, and it's absolutely bananas. So anybody here competing in that? Oh, hey, there we go. Very nice. Not you. So that's awesome. Actually, that's great. So the one thing that I can tell you is listen to commands. Make sure that you pay attention to what's going on in the warm-up room. We're going to have, these guys are going to be out there as well as some other people from Outcast. They're going to be out there kind of corralling people into their flights and making sure that they get the warm-ups that they need, that their timing is right, that when flight B is ready to go, we're not sitting here with no lifters in the chute and they're out there still. So we're gonna be making sure that you are kind of on track and on schedule to get done, because what we find is a lot of people that go to a meet, they don't know what the heck they're doing, and they're like a deer in headlights, somebody mentioned that today, and they don't know how to time their warm-ups. They wind up warming up maybe once or twice, and they come out and they miss their first attempt, and then it's downhill from there.
Yeah.
So with these two, we're gonna have like 4 to 5 people out there that are gonna be really kind of honing in on, they're not really looking at Thrive and making sure that all of those people are taken care of. They're there for everybody. They're there for the masses to make sure that everybody has a good time. There is no missed opportunities to get everybody's warm up successfully, and then be ready to go when it's time for you to lift, because we have a lot of people to get through that day, and we want to make sure that everybody has a good experience. That's really what it comes down to.
And ask questions. If
Oh,
it's
yeah.
your first meet, like, we implore everybody to just ask as much as you can.
There is no wrong question. Really no wrong question.
February 17th.
February 17th here, in this room, actually.
One of the things that we didn't really mention, but when it comes to like meet day environment, is everyone's really supportive and like exciting. Like everyone, you're gonna have complete strangers cheering for you. And
So that's the one
hoping that you-
nuance of the sport.
Yeah, is everyone like just is excited to see someone else succeed and get strong. So don't be afraid, make new friends, right? You'll have a blast. Share food.
Remember your deadlift socks.
After you compete.
Go ahead.
Rapid fire, I got a bunch of them. So the first thing that I'm here because of Samuel Aston. I'm not sure if you guys know who he is, but I'm with Angus CrossFit.
Okay.
in Dublin,
Yep.
And
I used to go get some work done
I'm
there.
here because I showed like more proclivities towards powerlifting.
Yep.
Everybody else I'm doing fast, I'm doing like 200 wall balls at a time. So he told me to get some information on. He mentioned the meet that you guys are talking about on February 17th. By the time I was informed about it, I've already been sold out.
That thing sold out in 7 days.
Spot opens up, let me know.
We want people to drop out of that meet. We don't want to be here that long.
So I guess my follow-up question to that would be like barrier to entry, this type of things. Like how do we get, like, is there a scheduled events where we access good
Yep.
information? Where do we sign up? How much does it cost? Do I need a USPA membership or anything along those lines? Just kind of basic stuff.
So I'm going to answer those a little bit out of order. In order to compete in any of our events, you have to be a USA Powerlifting member. Our members are annual, so that our memberships are annual, which means that you would sign up now. And sorry. So USAPL, USA Powerlifting, it's just an acronym. Yeah. So just make it one word instead of two. That is the federation that we primarily compete in. And the membership, the dues now are $70, and it's an annual membership. So when you sign up now, it's good till the end of the year. Let's say you decide, I'm not going to do it this year, but I may want to do it around maybe the end of this year or the beginning of next year. If you sign up in November 1st, that membership is good for the next 14 months. So it's good for the remaining 2 months of that year, all the way into the following end of that year. So there's that little caveat to that membership piece. As far as barriers to entry, we have no QTs on our local level meets. Our state championships, as of this year, we have established a QT because
QT is a qualifying total.
Thank you. There you go.
There we go, Mike.
So we want to make sure that your first meet is not the state meet. We want that meet to be held at another level. So we want people to aspire to get there. Now, the qualifying total is 35 kilos, which is basically the bar and the collars. It's nothing, but we want to make sure that you at least participate in a local level meet, because we don't want that level to die. Eventually, you may want to get to the level where you go to a regional level meet. Regional level is held at a national level caliber. For just some information in here, starting next year, the only way to get to national events, you have to compete in a state championship or a regional championship. or the previous year's nationals. So what that means, what that landscape looks like for 25 means you would have to already be on the roster for Raw Nats this year. So if you're not, it's probably not going to happen because it's full. It filled up in 13 hours. Yeah, 1,150 lifters in 13 hours is bananas. Our state meet is on March 16th and 17th at the Albany Cap Center. That meet is still open. Unfortunately, like I said again, you do need a qualifying total to participate. And the regional event is in Portland, Maine. It's like the first weekend in June 9th? Okay. June 9th, 8th and 9th. That again, you'll also need a qualifying total as well to get into that. But that is still far enough away that you could potentially find a meet. So with those events, you have to go and compete in a USA Powerlifting sanctioned local level meet, and that you're in basically. Yeah. And eventually, what's going to happen, and I'm only saying this now, is that our regional meets, because the funnel is getting smaller, where before the road to Raw Nationals or any of our national meets was every meet. Now it's literally 3. And so that means that those events are eventually going to get big. Our state meet this year is we are already over 60 lifters at the highest it's ever been forever. 170, almost 180. So I foresee regionals being a 300 lifter meet very soon, and maybe higher. Being that it's in Maine this year, it may not do that. It's, whatever. I have already petitioned to get it back into New York again, because we ran it last year, and it's never been in New York ever. So I'd love to bring it back, because I think Albany is like the centralized area in the Northeast, because you have Long Island, you got Buffalo, you have Maine, you have Boston, all the other New England states, so it just seems silly not to do that.
Where do you find the meets?
What's that?
Where do you find these?
So our calendar, the calendar is on usapowerlifting.com. There's literally a little calendar link you can click on, and it'll bring you in there.
USA Powerlifting calendar, it'll come right up.
There you go. And you can filter it, so you can filter by state. So if you go hit the drop down, pick NY and hit search, it'll show you all the New York meets. We ran 30 meets in New York last year. We've already got 22 on the calendar right now. My guess is we're going to surpass 30, which is the goal, because the sport is still growing. But the problem that we have in New York, and it's a good problem, is the meets that are on the calendar right now, probably more than half are full. And people are finding that out, that they try to go sign up for a meet in April, and like, okay, guess I can't do that. Potentially, there's going to be another meet in April.
I'm waiting on that.
Okay, we're waiting on that. So,
In November.
oh yeah, and we have the Sincere meet in November, so if you're looking that far down the road, there's already meets that I know that I'm going to probably put a sanction in for that aren't on a calendar yet, but they're just kind of ideas in my head of what we want to do. So there'll be events out there, but when it comes to powerlifting, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to go to a meet tomorrow. That philosophy's out the window. That doesn't happen anymore. You have to have a plan. You have to plan for months out. Then you start the process of getting yourself a trainer, a coach, or getting on a program to get to that next level and figure out what you want to do. Another barrier for entry, there is no competition. You are your own competition. There is no minimum qualifying number that you had to hit for a squat, bench, and deadlift. It's whatever you could do. Everybody's individual, So I get that question asked all the time. I want to make sure that I'm competitive. Well, come and compete first and see if you actually are. And, you get a bunch of 9 attempts and you make it through the meet and you get a total. Then you start building from there. You don't know how strong you are until you actually compete for the first time, because that really sets the foundation in place. And the one cool thing about we have a lifting database. Well, that's more advanced. We'll get to that later on, but like later on, you can see the progression of your totals throughout the course of your entire lifting career with USA Powerlifting. You can see where you went up. You can see where you went down. You can see where squat, bench, and deadlift kind of did the little, stock market. But it's pretty cool to kind of look at the evolution of you as a lifter. I mean, when I squatted and benched for my first time back in 2014, I could probably bench what I squatted and pulled. Now those numbers are those numbers are way different. But it's taken me a long time, you know? You have to you got to figure out what milestones you have in your head, what you want to do. Is at 70 or 80, is a 250-pound squat good? Is it good, Tammy? That would be amazing. I mean, so Tammy, how old are you, Tammy? There you go. She's going to Raw Nationals. She hit at the meet. She could be that sincere? Yeah.
Tammy, did you do sincere?
Let's go. So you competed at what meet? What was the last meet? Ladies of Iron? Okay. All of her. Okay. You competed at the Masters meet. So all of Tammy's numbers were American records, but we couldn't accept them because of the level of the meet. So when she goes to Raw Nationals and has national and category 2 or 1 referees and the chairs, she'll own those records. Oh, that's right. She has some, right? That's right.
Tammy's a competing fool.
Yeah. Also, don't make the mistake of competing too many times.
Yeah.
So I am not a coach, but these guys can attest. There is a limit to how many meets you should do a year, you know? And when you have a 6, 12, 14, 16, 20, whatever week blocks you have to get ready, you have to kind of plan out, where's my meet going to be? Where's it going to fit in the calendar? And you don't have to do meets in New York. If you go to compete in Massachusetts, Philadelphia, Ohio, you can still break New York records. We always want you to come to lift in, you know, our state at our meets, but if the availability isn't there, you can still break state records in a state you're competing in. It doesn't matter.
I just keep coming up with questions, sorry. This is like more so along the lines of just the mechanics of the meet itself, like how many attempts do you get for each weight, like stay the same weight, or does everybody come in the same weight and then they attempt that weight and then the bar just keeps going up in weight, like how do these times actually work?
So every meet, if you're doing a full power meet, it's 9 attempts. You get 3 for squat, 3 for bench, 3 for deadlift. When you weigh in, you provide your opening attempts to the referee that, you know, does your weigh-in. You know, obviously that'll look different for everyone. Generally, you submit for an opening attempt something that you could do on your worst day, even if you're sick in the gym, right? Just for 3. You wanna be safe and secure getting into a meet, right? Generally, the schedule of events, depending on how many people sign up, like women and men, lightweight, heavyweight. Most meets run AM sessions with lighter weight women, heavier weight women, and sometimes lighter weight men, depending on how big the meet is. And then the afternoon is usually the remainder of those that haven't gone in the morning. So let's say there are 2 flights, right? Flight A will do all of their squats, and then flight B will do all of their squats. Then there's a 10-minute break. Same thing for bench, break, and then deadlift, and then that's the end of the morning session. Depending on when it gets out, there's usually like an hour and a half to 2 hours before the afternoon session starts, and then the same process goes. When you come out, right, and you take your attempt, if you get your attempt, you then go over to a table where there's an expediter and a scorekeeper. You'll give them your next attempt. They'll put it on a card. They'll put it in the computer. You take that next attempt. If you fail a lift, you still need to go over to the table and tell them you have the option to go up even if you missed. It's usually recommended that you don't unless it was, you know, some kind of technical mishap, right? Like you slipped when you were locking out, like your foot tripped or your foot came up when you were benching. But if you don't submit an attempt, if you make a lift and you don't go over the table, after 60 seconds, they're just going to put in the next lowest jump that you can make, which is 2.5 kilos. If you miss and you don't go over to the table, they're just going to put in the same weight.
You get 60 seconds to do that.
Yep.
Do you load your own bar or you have the referee?
No,
That's with our spotting and loading.
yeah, we have, so usually on the platform you have a spotting and loading crew. We usually hire a third party with like schools and universities that are looking to send their students to like collegiate level nationals or raw nationals. They usually do a really, really good job of spotting and loading. It's like watching NASCAR, but on, you know, a powerlifting platform. you have 3 referees, 2 on the sides, 1 in the front. And then if you are squatting or benching in excess of 500 pounds, you have 5 spotters instead of 3.
There's always an accumulating bar.
Yep, yeah, the weight always goes up throughout the flight.
So everyone does one attempt, and then it resets, and everyone does their second attempt, and then it resets, and everyone does their third attempt.
Yeah, so you might go, right,
You have to be the same every time.
yeah, you might go 5th on your first attempt, and then if you were to jump a large amount, you might be towards the bottom on your second attempt.
So it's kind of, I come from a track and field background, so like it would be similar like a high jump or like a pole vault where they have the bar at the same height and the
Yeah.
weight comes back
Yep.
and then just keep going up.
Same. Same. And then we start over again when we go to the second and third attempts. Yeah.
And one thing to keep in mind is that you have to get at least one of the lifts, because if you miss, let's say you miss your first squat, your second, and your third, that's called bombing out of the meet, and you can't get a total, and you're technically disqualified. Now, you can continue in the meet and finish the bench and finish the deadlift, but you won't get a registered total, and that's even more important now because of what Jan was saying, because in order to compete in like a state level meet, you have to have a total. So you could theoretically total, let's say, 500 kilos, but if you missed all 3 of your squats, no total.
Yeah.
You know.
Same goes for records too, right? Like if you break a record and you bomb out.
Unless you're in the push-pull division or a deadlift bench only division, yeah.
And so that's why it's really important, like at your first meet, like Jordan said, your openers should be things that you really have a strong confidence that you could do. Because once you get that, it's like weights literally lifted off your shoulder, and like you can then push it for the second and third, you know. But you want to be in the meet, as we say.
Anybody else? No?
All right.
Just for me, I got my work offered free screenings for physical therapy. If anyone wants any, just come and take your card. If you ever have anything, whether it's weightlifting related or life related, right? You can come in and talk to us, and we'll get you kind of pointed in the right direction, whatever it is.
I also have a challenge for anybody that wants to accept it. So, my team got me a 9-kilo coffee mug. So for the woman or man that could hold this thing for the longest time, ABC gave me some snacks you guys can have. So I mean,
Like hold it here or hold it?
no, you're gonna hold it like this until it starts doing that. Oh, you want to hold it out there?
Oh yeah, yeah, do that
So
one.
until it starts, getting to work, you can't hold it up.
What is this, physical 100? Good Lord.
Remember, rotator cuff surgery. I'm your guy.
So if there's any takers, please.
Yeah. If anyone else has any other nutrition questions, feel free to come up.
I told you it's heavy.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Tammy. Thanks for coming, Tammy.
So informative.
I said, thanks for coming. We can always count on you to be at the bent bar meet and the events.
Yeah, and thanks for the invite. We actually have a little